Hello guys, welcome to Bald Voldemort. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Harry found the mother box and became the first new god wizard? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The singing box. The summer had settled over Privet Drive like a wet blanket, heavy, airless, and deeply unpleasant. Number 4 sat in the middle of the street like every other house on the block, indistinguishable from its neighbors except for the boy locked in the smallest bedroom on the second floor, staring at the ceiling and counting cracks. Harry had been counting a lot of things lately. Days since Cedric died, 41. Owls from Ron or Hermione, 3, all carefully vague, all clearly written with someone looking over their shoulder. Letters from Dumbledore, 0. He'd stopped expecting one around day 15. The scar on his forehead hadn't burned in 2 weeks. He wasn't sure whether that was a good sign or whether Voldemort had simply gotten better at hiding. Hedwig was gone for the night. He'd sent her out with a reply to Hermione's last letter, which had contained so little actual information that Harry had written back with only the words "I know." He figured she'd understand. She always did. The bedroom was stifling. The Dursleys had confiscated his fan sometime in June, citing no reason beyond the particular satisfaction Vernon Dursley took in confiscation. Harry had his wand in his waistband and his trunk shoved against the wall, and he'd been lying on his bed in the dark for so long that when he finally swung his legs over the edge and stood up, the floor felt strange under his feet. He needed air. That was all, just air. He pulled on his trainers without bothering to tie them properly, grabbed his wand out of habit, and slipped out the window. He hadn't planned to walk far. Privet Drive at midnight was exactly as interesting as Privet Drive at noon. Manicured lawns, identical letter boxes, the distant sound of someone's television bleeding through curtains. But the night air at least had the decency to move, and Harry walked with his hands in his pockets, following no particular direction, just putting distance between himself and that ceiling. He ended up on the far edge of the estate, where the housing development petered out and the landscaping gave way to something older and less managed. There was a path there that he'd noticed before but never followed. A dirt track worn between overgrown hedges that led away from the streetlights and down a shallow hill toward what looked, from the road, like a patch of wasteland. He followed it. The wasteland turned out to be the remains of a churchyard. The church itself was barely there, 3 walls of old stone, the 4th collapsed inward, the roof long since gone. Ivy had claimed most of it. The graveyard attached to it was older still, the headstones crooked and moss-covered, the names on most of them too worn to read. It had probably been derelict for decades, swallowed by development on 3 sides and simply forgotten. Harry sat on the low stone wall that separated what remained of the churchyard from the overgrown field beyond it and breathed. The night was quiet in the way the countryside got quiet, not silent but layered, insects and wind and the occasional sound of something small moving through the grass. He could see a scatter of stars through a gap in the clouds. It was, he thought, the most peaceful he'd felt since May. He was still sitting there, not thinking about anything in particular, when he heard it. A sound. Except that wasn't quite right. It wasn't precisely a sound the way a voice was a sound or traffic was a sound. It was more like the memory of a sound sitting just underneath his hearing, a vibration that seemed to come from the ground itself rather than the air. Low and rhythmic and oddly warm, like the bass note of something enormous breathing. Harry straightened. He looked around. The churchyard was empty, the shadows undisturbed. Nothing moved in the long grass beyond the wall. But the sound, the vibration, was still there, and he realized after a moment that it was coming from beneath his feet. From the ground just inside what remained of the church's east wall, where the old stone floor had cracked apart and grass had pushed up through the gaps. He stood up. His wand was already in his hand without him consciously drawing it. Lumos. The wand light fell across the ruined floor. Most of it was just rubble and grass and the occasional broken pew rotting quietly into the earth. But in the far corner, where 2 of the remaining walls met and the stonework had subsided, there was a section of floor that looked different. The cracks ran differently there, not random settling, but in a rough pattern, almost a square, as though something had been placed beneath the stone deliberately, pressing up from below over a very long time. Harry walked toward it. The vibration grew as he got closer. Still not quite a sound, more like standing next to something that was alive and simply waiting. His scar didn't hurt. His magic didn't spike the way it did around dark objects. This was something else entirely. Something that felt inexplicably like being called by name in a language you didn't know you understood. He crouched in front of the cracked section of floor. Up close, he could see that the stone itself had been disturbed at some point, not recently, but not in the last century either. Someone had placed something under here, someone who'd taken care with it. He pressed his palm flat against the largest piece of broken stone. The vibration moved up his arm and into his chest, and for one breathless second it was everywhere in his blood and behind his eyes and in the hollow place under his sternum that he'd stopped trying to name, and then the stone moved. Not violently, not with any grinding drama. It simply shifted like a door on a well-oiled hinge, and beneath it was dark soil, and buried in the soil, perhaps 18 inches down, was a box. It was roughly the size of a hardcover book. The casing was a metal he'd never seen, not silver, not steel, something between the two but warmer in color, almost amber where his wand light caught it. The surface was covered in circuitry that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced, fine lines and geometric shapes that drew the eye along them in patterns that kept almost resolving into something meaningful. And it was the source of the vibration. He knew that immediately. The moment he laid eyes on it, the sound moved from the edge of his awareness to the center of it, and it was less like a sound than ever, more like a word, said below the threshold of language in a register that skipped the ears entirely and went straight to something deeper. Harry dug around it with his hands, loosening the soil, and lifted it free. It was warm. Not temperature warm, though it was that too. It was warm the way sunlight was warm, the way the first real meal after going without was warm. It sat in his hands and it hummed, and the humming was the most comfort he had felt since Sirius's voice threw a fire, and that thought hit him hard enough that he sat down heavily in the dirt with the box in his lap and just held it. Nothing happened, nothing dramatic or instantaneous. He didn't glow. The sky didn't split. It was just him and the ruined church and the stars and this box that was singing to something in his chest like it had been waiting for exactly him. After a while, he noticed the surface was changing. The circuitry was shifting. Not mechanical, not visibly moving, but the patterns were different from what he'd first seen, rearranging themselves over seconds and minutes into new configurations that were, he stared at them, not random. They were responding to him, to his hands on the casing, to his heartbeat, to something he couldn't name. The lines curved differently where his thumbs rested. The geometric shapes nearest his palms had opened like flowers, fractaling outward into new complexity. "What are you?" he said quietly. The box said, and it did not say it in any language, not in English or Latin or any tongue he knew, but it said it nonetheless in the same register as the humming, bypassing language altogether and depositing the meaning directly into his understanding like a stone dropped into still water. "I am a mother box. And you are the one I was waiting for." Harry stared at it for a long moment. "Right," he said, obviously. He carried it home inside his jacket. Not because he was hiding it, particularly, there was no one on the streets to see him, but because keeping it against his chest felt right, and he'd stopped questioning what felt right approximately 2 minutes after picking it up. In his room, he set it on the desk and looked at it under the lamp. It was still doing the thing with its circuitry, the patterns shifting slowly, cataloging him maybe, or communicating something in a format he wasn't yet equipped to receive. He pulled his chair up and looked at it the way he'd once looked at his first potions textbook, like something he was going to have to figure out whether he liked it or not. "Can you understand me?" he said. "Like properly?" Yes, not a voice. Not even a thought exactly, more like certainty deposited behind his eyes. But clear. "Where did you come from?" The response to this one was more complex. Not words, but impressions, layered and rapid, like someone flipping through an enormous book too fast to read but leaving the overall sense of the content, something vast, something old, a war between worlds, a person dying, choosing to hide rather than let what they carried fall into the wrong hands. Earth chosen for its obscurity, a churchyard in Surrey chosen for its iron quiet, its distance from everything that mattered. "Someone hid you here, to keep me from him." From who? One impression this time, clean and unambiguous. Harry felt it like cold water. Darkseid. He didn't know the name. But he knew from the way the mother box delivered it that it was the kind of name that meant something in the same way Voldemort meant something, not because of the sounds but because of the weight behind them. The wrongness, the absolute certainty of harm. "Is he looking for you?" "Always." Harry leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, "that's not great." He picked the mother box up again, and the circuitry rewrote itself immediately, reaching toward his hands. And the warmth moved through him again, that deep, total warmth, and something inside it recognized something inside him, and there was a sound like the universe clearing its throat, and Harry's vision went white. He wasn't sure afterward whether he'd passed out or traveled somewhere or both. What he remembered was light, not the sharp white of a spell but something older and more total, a light that had weight to it that pressed against his skin and moved through him and showed him things. He saw the source. He didn't know what to call it then, but he understood it later, the fundamental substrate of existence, the energy that ran beneath everything, the ground floor of reality that all power ultimately drew from. It looked like nothing and everything simultaneously. In the vision, or the experience, or whatever it was, he was standing at its edge, and it looked back at him with the same recognition the mother box had shown. He saw what he was in that light. Not Harry Potter the orphan, not the boy who lived, not the kid that Voldemort couldn't kill, something more elemental. A soul that had crossed the threshold of death and come back, carrying something of that crossing in the marrow of him, a resonance that the source recognized the way a tuning fork recognized a matching pitch. He had died at 1 year old in some partial and profound sense. He carried it with him. He had always carried it. The mother box had been searching for something that could receive what it carried. Not just power, understanding. A mind and soul capable of holding both the structured artistry of magic and the raw cosmic frequency of the source simultaneously without one destroying the other. It had been waiting, patient and quiet under that floor for however many years, running through possibility after possibility, and then Harry Potter had sat on the wall above it and the answer had been obvious. He woke up at his desk with his face on his arms and the mother box warm in his hands, and outside his window the first pale light of dawn was beginning, and he felt different in a way that had nothing to do with anything he could have articulated. He felt complete, like a room that had always been missing something had finally had the furniture put back. He spent the next 4 days not leaving the house. The Dursleys barely noticed. Vernon was deep in some summer project involving the garden that kept him outside most of the day. Petunia was running her usual circuit of gossip and cleaning, and Dudley was spending the summer at a friend's house 2 streets over, which meant that Harry had the kitchen to himself for most of the day and could sit at the table with the mother box and simply talk to it without anyone interrupting. Talking was perhaps the wrong word. It was more like learning a new language, except the language was being assembled directly in his mind by the process of contact. Every hour he spent with the box in his hands, more came through: concepts, history, cosmology, the structure of things he'd had no framework for before. New gods, the fourth world, apocalypse and new genesis, the source wall, the anti-life equation. He absorbed it the way he absorbed things when he actually wanted to know them, which was nothing like the way he absorbed things in class, fast and total and alive with genuine interest. He asked questions and the mother box answered, and the answers led to more questions, and he started writing things down in the margins of a Muggle notebook he'd found in Dudley's old room, not because he needed to remember them, but because the act of writing helped him organize what was coming in. On the second day, he tried something. He was sitting at the kitchen table with the mother box, trying to understand the concept of the boom tube, the spatial folding mechanism that new gods used to travel between worlds, when he understood in the way he was coming to understand things now that he could do that. Not casually, not yet, but the potential was there. The mother box could open a boom tube, but more than that, his own newly awakened connection to the source meant that with practice, with understanding, he could reshape fundamental geometry the same way a wizard reshaped the behavior of matter with intent and a wand. He pointed his wand at the wall. And he did something that was neither a spell nor a source technique alone, but both simultaneously: the structured intention of magic riding the raw energy of the source like a ship on a deep current, and the wall across from him rippled, like fabric hit by wind. Like reality briefly reconsidered its position and thought about it. Harry stared at the ripple as it faded. "Huh," he said. He tried again. Different intention this time. He imagined reaching through, folding the space in the corner of the kitchen like folding a piece of paper, touching the 2 non-adjacent points together. His wand arm was straight and steady, and in his other hand the mother box sang, and a circle of crackling golden light, perhaps 3 feet across, opened in the corner of the kitchen like a door. Through it he could see the back garden. He held it for 10 seconds. Then he released it cleanly, and it closed without fuss. Harry set down his wand on the table. He picked up his pen. He wrote in the margin of the notebook, "Both at once works better than either separately." Then underneath that, "Don't tell anyone yet," not because he was afraid, not because he intended to hide, but because there was a particular quality to something that was still becoming, a fragility not in the thing itself but in the space around it, and he wanted to understand what this was before he handed it to other people to react to. He'd spent his whole life being defined by other people's reactions to him. This time, just this once, he was going to understand himself first. On the third day, he felt it. He was in the garden, standing in the early morning before the Dursleys were up, the mother box in one hand and his wand in the other, running through something that was evolving into a training practice, combining spellwork with source energy, learning where the 2 systems reinforced each other and where they required different handling. When the hairs on his arm stood up and his scar flickered. Not the pain he knew, something different, more distant, but real. Voldemort was aware of him. Not present, not nearby, just touching the edge of the connection that the diary and the graveyard had apparently cemented between them, pressing at it lightly like a finger on a bruise. Checking. Harry looked at the mother box. And the mother box, for the first time, sent him something that was not information but intention, a sharp clarity like a blade being drawn. A feeling that in human language would have been something like, "Not this time." He raised his wand. He reached for the source, it came easily now, like opening a hand, and he pushed back at the connection. Not with a clumancy, which he hadn't been taught properly anyway, but with something he didn't have a name for yet. A fundamental frequency that was simply him, amplified and made precise, that found the thread of Voldemort's consciousness and snapped it cleanly. The feeling vanished. The scar went quiet. Harry stood in the garden and breathed. On the other side of England, in whatever dark place Voldemort occupied, something had gone wrong with something that should have worked, and Voldemort would know that and would be. Harry could almost feel it across the severed distance, confused, unsettled, which was a feeling Tom Riddle was not accustomed to. Harry picked up his wand again and went back to his practice. Hedwig came back on the fourth evening with a letter from Ron that was slightly more urgent than the previous ones. Apparently, someone had told someone who'd told someone else that the Order of the Phoenix was planning to come and collect Harry before the end of the month, and Ron thought he ought to know that before it happened. The letter was signed with 3 different postscripts that tripped over each other in Ron's characteristic way, the last of which said, "Hermione says to tell you not to do anything mental. I told her that was basically like asking a fish not to swim, but she made me write it anyway." Harry smiled at that. He wrote back, "Tell her I haven't done anything mental. I've mostly just been sitting in the kitchen," which was technically true. He sealed the letter, attached it to Hedwig's leg, and sent her off into the evening. Then he sat on the windowsill with the mother box resting in his lap and looked out at Privet Drive, at the ordinary darkness of it, the streetlights coming on one by one, the neighborhood settling into its nightly sameness. Something was coming. He could feel it the way you could feel a change in air pressure before a storm, not in a specific, named way, but in the aggregate shift of everything around him. The mother box knew it too. The circuitry on its surface was running faster tonight, the patterns more complex, something that read like preparation. He'd have to leave soon. Order would come for him, or school would, or both. He'd have to walk back into the world that had been deciding things about him since he was 11 months old. He looked down at the mother box and it sang quietly in his hands, and he thought about the ripple in the kitchen wall, and the snap of Voldemort's consciousness retreating, and the white light of the source, and what it had felt like to be seen fully without confusion or reservation, or the particular sadness that came with loving something you'd already decided was more burden than person. "Whatever's coming," he said quietly to the box and to himself and to the night beyond the window, "I'm not afraid of it." The mother box pulsed once, warm and certain, and the circuitry rearranged itself into something that, if you looked at it from the right angle, looked almost like an answer. Chapter 2, The Language of the Source. The Order of the Phoenix arrived on a Tuesday, and they were not subtle about it. Harry heard them before he saw them, the crack of multiple apparitions in the street outside, enough of them close together that even Vernon Dursley looked up from his newspaper with the expression of a man whose neighborhood was being invaded by the wrong sort. Harry was already at the window. He counted 7 people, black cloaks, wands visible, moving in the particular purposeful way that wizards moved when they were doing something official and wanted everyone to know it. Moody was in front. That distinctive rolling gait, the magical eye swiveling independently, scanning rooftops. Behind him, Tonks' pink hair tonight, which was perhaps not the most covert choice, and Lupin, whose presence made something loosen in Harry's chest despite everything. Then Kingsley, massive and calm, and 3 others he recognized less well. He pulled on his jacket. The mother box was already in his inside pocket, warm against his ribs. His trunk was packed. It had been packed for 2 days. He was at the front door before Vernon could work up the speed to intercept him, and he opened it himself and stepped out, which robbed the Order members of whatever entrance they'd been planning. Moody's magical eye snapped to him immediately. "Potter." Moody's real eye looked him up and down. Something shifted in his expression, subtle, the kind of thing that wouldn't have been visible to anyone who didn't know Moody's face. But Harry caught it, a flicker of something that might have been recalibration. "You're ready." "Been ready." Harry levitated his trunk out behind him without looking back at it, and the casual ease of it, no wand out, no visible effort, made Tonks blink. "That's," she looked at his empty hands. "Did you just—" "Trunk's heavy," Harry said pleasantly. "Shall we go?" Lupin's eyes had not moved from him since he'd come out the door. There was something careful and quiet in that look that Harry recognized as the specific kind of attention someone paid when they were trying to work out if you were all right without asking directly. Harry met it and gave him a small, genuine smile because Lupin had earned that much. "You look well," Lupin said. "Better than last summer." "I feel better." "Good." A pause. "Harry, Grimmauld Place," Harry said. Lupin closed his mouth. Then quietly, "Yes." "Then let's go." Grimmauld Place was exactly as grim as the name suggested, which was clearly intentional on the part of whoever had named it. The house smelled of old wood and older secrets, and Sirius's mother's portrait shrieked at them from behind her curtains before Tonks hushed her by the simple expedient of shouting back, which Harry privately thought showed excellent instincts. Sirius was in the kitchen. He looked better than the last time Harry had seen him, more solid, less like a man being slowly erased. The Azkaban hollows in his face had filled in somewhat over the months of hiding, and his eyes had some of their old clarity. He stood up when Harry came down the stairs and they looked at each other across the kitchen table, and then Sirius crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled Harry into a hug that had a year's worth of frustrated distance compressed into it. Harry held on. He felt the mother box warm against his chest, tucked away, patient. "You're taller," Sirius said when he let go, stepping back and looking at him. His eyes did what Lupin's had done, that careful inventory. "And something's different." "Lots has happened," Harry said. "I can see that." Sirius's eyes dropped to his jacket pocket for half a second, then came back to his face. "Dinner first, you can tell me about it after." Harry sat down at the kitchen table. Mrs. Weasley had been cooking, and she swept him into a brief fierce hug that smelled of flour and warmth before depositing a bowl of something hearty in front of him. And Ron came thundering down the stairs a moment later with his hair in absolute chaos. And then Hermione appeared behind him, and the kitchen was suddenly full of the noise and overlap of being with people. And Harry sat in the middle of it and ate his dinner and felt the particular relief of that. "You look different," Hermione said, sitting across from him, watching him with the expression she reserved for problems she was determined to solve. "What did you do over summer?" "Read mostly." "Read what stuff?" He took a spoonful of stew. "How was your summer?" Her eyes narrowed approximately 1 millimeter, which in Hermione language meant that was a deflection, and I know it, and we are going to revisit this conversation very soon. "Fine," she said. "My parents took me to France." "Harry, good stew, Mrs. Weasley," Harry said. Molly beamed. Hermione pressed her lips together and looked at Ron, who shrugged in a manner that communicated both "don't ask me" and "I told you he'd be like this," with impressive economy. The meeting happened after dinner. Harry had known there would be one. Had known, in fact, that the entire point of bringing him to Grimmauld Place before school started was to sit him down and manage what he knew and what he was told. To draw the careful lines that Dumbledore preferred to have between himself and the people he cared about who might complicate his plans. The Order members gathered around the long kitchen table and Dumbledore was not there. He'd sent word, apparently, that he would come tomorrow, but Moody chaired the meeting with characteristic directness, which meant he talked at the table in the particular Moody-ish way that was somewhere between a briefing and an accusation. Voldemort was active. They knew this. There were movements in the ministry that suggested influence at high levels. Fudge was, in Moody's word, compromised, which Harry filed away. There had been 2 disappearances in the last month that the Order was watching. Hogwarts would have umbrage. Harry sat at the table with his hands flat on the wood and listened, and when Moody had finished he said, "What aren't you telling us?" The room went slightly quiet. "Harry," Lupin started, "there's something specific. Something Dumbledore wants to tell me himself, which means it's either about me personally or he thinks it'll change how I behave if I know it, and he wants to manage the delivery." Harry looked at Moody. "Which is it?" Moody's magical eye fixed on him for a long moment. His real eye, Harry noticed, was almost amused. "Both," Moody said. "Right," Harry nodded. "Fine, I'll wait." He said it without resentment, without heat, just as a fact. He had his own things to understand before that conversation happened anyway. It could wait. The meeting wrapped up. People dispersed. Harry caught Sirius's eye across the room and Sirius tilted his head toward the door. They ended up in a small room on the first floor. Just the 2 of them, with a couple of lamps casting warm light on shelves full of old black family books that had probably been hostile to at least 3 generations of library patrons. Sirius settled into a chair and looked at Harry with the directness that was one of the best things about him. No preamble, no careful framing, just tell me. Harry took the mother box out of his jacket. He set it on the table between them. The circuitry caught the lamplight and moved slowly across the surface, cataloging the room, and it hummed in the particular way that Harry knew now was its alert hum, the pitch it used in new spaces with new people. Sirius looked at it for a long moment. "What is that?" "It's called a mother box." Harry paused. "It's not magical, not the way we mean. It's something older. It was buried under a church near Privet Drive. And you found it." "And it found me," Harry said, "because that was the more accurate version. It bonds, it chose me. I know that sounds mental, Harry. I grew up in this house." Sirius gestured at the walls. "I have a fairly expansive definition of mental." His eyes were still on the box. "What does it do?" "It connects me to something called the source." Harry tried to find the right words for what he'd spent 4 days absorbing, and found, as he'd suspected, that human language was not really equipped for the task. "It's the energy beneath everything, the foundation of existence. Magic draws from it whether wizards know it or not, but it's like magic is a river and the source is the ocean the river comes from. The box lets me touch the ocean directly." Sirius was very quiet, The look on his face was not fear Harry had been watching for fear, but something more complex. A man reconsidering the edges of a map he thought he knew. "Show me," Sirius said. Harry picked up the mother box. He held it in his left hand, wand in his right, and he reached. It was reaching, that was the only word for it, like extending a hand into dark water and finding it warm. And he let the source move through him and out through his wand arm, and with a gesture that was nothing like a standard spell motion, he unmade the lamp on the table. Not extinguished it. Unmade it. Reduced it to its component materials, which settled gently onto the table in a neat arrangement, glass, metal, wax, because his intention had been precise and he was learning quickly that precision was everything. Then he put it back together. The lamp sat on the table, intact, burning. Sirius stared at it for a very long time. "James," he said softly, not quite to Harry, "you would have had absolutely no idea what to do with this." Harry felt the warmth of that, the way Sirius could make him feel real and continuous with something, not just arrived from nowhere. "Does it scare you? Does it scare me?" Sirius repeated this, tasting the question. He met Harry's eyes. "It worries me, because something hid that box and something is looking for it, and that means you're in the middle of something even larger than the something you're already in the middle of, and I have a strong instinct that this will not end quietly." He leaned forward. "But scared of you. Not even slightly. You're my godson." Harry exhaled. He hadn't known he was holding that. "There's someone looking for it," he said, "called Darkseid." Sirius's brow furrowed. You wouldn't know the name. He's not from this world." Harry set the mother box back on the table. "He's not like Voldemort. The box showed me what he is. He doesn't want power the way Voldemort does. He wants to end free will completely for everyone everywhere." He paused. "The box was hidden on Earth specifically to keep it from him." The silence stretched. "Right," Sirius said. "So Voldemort, and also a cosmic totalitarian. Welcome to my life." Sirius laughed, sudden and real, and it broke the tension in the room cleanly. Okay. He rubbed his face. "You need to tell Dumbledore." "I know. On your terms, though. Don't let him." Sirius stopped, started again. "Don't let him take it from you, whatever story he tells about keeping it safe." Harry looked at him steadily. "I know," he said again. Sirius studied him for a moment. "You've changed," he said, not accusatory. More like someone confirming something they'd felt from the moment Harry walked in the door. "You're still you, but there's something settled," Harry said. "I think the word is settled." Sirius nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "that's it exactly." He was in the library at 2 in the morning when the room changed. Not dramatically, not the way the lamp had changed, not with any visible mechanics. Just a shift in the quality of the air, a sudden alertness in the mother box that was nothing like its usual hum, and Harry was on his feet with his wand out before he'd consciously processed any of it. The figure that came through was not human. Not straightforwardly, anyway. She had the shape of a human woman, tall, perhaps 5'10", dark-skinned, black hair cut severely close on one side and long on the other. And armor that was not like any armor Harry had seen, dark material over lighter underneath, covering her from the neck to the knee. She carried a sword at her hip and something that looked like a compact pistol in one hand, except that it had no barrel and the surface glowed faintly along the edge. She was looking at the mother box. She was not looking at Harry. She looked at it the way someone looked at a thing they had been searching for a very long time, with relief and grief and something complicated running beneath both. And for 3 full seconds she just stood there while the spatial distortion she'd come through, a perfect circle of crackling golden light, a boom tube, Harry recognized it now, closed behind her. Then her eyes moved to him. They were gold. Not the gold of a potion or a fire, but the gold of something that predated human color wheels, deep and lit from within, the eyes of something old enough to have watched stars form. "You opened it," she said. Her voice was low and deliberate with an accent that was nothing Harry could place. "You bonded with it." "Yes," Harry said. His wand was still up, but he hadn't shot anything, partly because she hadn't moved toward him and partly because the mother box was humming in a register he'd come to associate with known rather than threat. She looked at the box again, then back at him, and her expression did something complicated. "How old are you?" 15. Something moved across her face. It might have been distress if her face had allowed distress. It didn't quite. It was more like a controlled reordering of a strong reaction. "You're a child." "I'm the one holding the mother box," Harry said. "I think that's the relevant detail." She studied him for a moment with those golden eyes. He studied her back. He wasn't afraid, and he thought she could tell, and he thought she wasn't sure what to make of that. "My name is Becca," she said. "I am a warrior of New Genesis." A pause. "I came here to retrieve what you're holding." "The mother box chose me," Harry said. "I know that." And the weight of those 3 words, the frustration and the resignation and the profound inconvenience of them, was almost funny. "I can feel that it chose you. The resonance is, it's not something I can misread. But this changes nothing about the situation." Darkseid is looking for it. I have been tracking it for 11 years. If he finds it, then it's a good thing it bonded to someone who can keep it safe, Harry said, her eyes narrowed, not in anger in assessment. She looked at him the way Moody looked at things he was trying to categorize. You are remarkably calm, she said, for someone facing a new god warrior in the middle of the night. You're remarkably bad at stealth, Harry said, for someone who's been tracking something for 11 years. A beat. Then very slightly the corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something that acknowledged the point. I used a boom tube in a building full of sleeping humans, she said. I was not expecting the box to be held by someone awake and responsive. I don't sleep much. Harry lowered his wand, not all the way but enough to signal something. The box knows you, it's not alarmed by you. We have worked together before. Her voice shifted on this, something underneath it that was quieter and older. I knew the being who hid it here. She stopped. She was someone I respected. She died. She chose to die rather than let Darkseid take what she carried. Becca said it without flinching, but the way she said it, the particular controlled precision of it, told him more than the words. She hid the mother box and she destroyed herself so that its location could not be extracted from her. She was the bravest person I have known in several centuries. Harry held that. I'm sorry. Becca looked at him with the gold eyes. You are strange, she said, and it didn't sound like an insult. What are you? You're not a standard human. The box does not bond with standard humans. You have some connection to the source that I can feel from here, and it is not the kind of connection that comes from training alone. What were you before this? A wizard, Harry said. I can do magic, real magic, trained and structured, spells, potions, all of it. He paused. And I died once when I was a baby, partially. I think that's the part the box responded to. Becca was very still. You died and returned. Something died and I kept going, yeah. He'd never quite put it that way before, but it fit. The killing curse, it hit me when I was one. It didn't work the way it was supposed to. The gold eyes moved to his scar. She looked at it for a moment with an expression that was not reverence, not quite, but the kind of recognition someone showed when a thing they'd theorized turned out to be real. A soul that has crossed the threshold, she said quietly. That is why the source resonates with you. You have something of both sides of it in you. You are a bridge. She was working it out as she said it, the words trying to catch up to understanding. No wonder. The box tried to explain it, Harry said. I didn't have all the vocabulary. I have the vocabulary. She looked at the mother box, then at him. You would need someone to teach you what you are, what you can do. Are you offering? She appeared to consider this as a serious question, which he appreciated. I came to retrieve the box, she said. I cannot retrieve the box. It has bonded, and that bond is absolute, and even if I were willing to attempt to break it, which I am not, the attempt would kill you and destroy the box simultaneously. A pause. So yes. I am offering because the alternative is that you wield something of extraordinary power without understanding its cosmological context, and that is the kind of thing that ends worlds. Cheerful, Harry said. I am a realist. Realist and I get along fine. He considered her for a moment, the gold eyes, the sword, the ancient weight of her. There are other people in this house, Order of the Phoenix, resistance movement against Voldemort, our dark wizard. They'll probably want to know who you are. Voldemort, she repeated, the one who put the curse on you as a child. The same. And is he relevant to Darkseid? Not yet, Harry paused, but I think he will be. Becca's expression sharpened. It was a very particular kind of sharpening, the focus of someone who understood tactical escalation and didn't like the shape of what was being described. Explain. Harry pulled a chair out from the table with the same wandless ease he'd used on his trunk in the street and sat in it and looked up at her. I'll explain, he said, if you sit down and explain New Genesis and the anti-life equation to me properly, because the box gave me the overview and I want the details. She looked at the chair across from him. She looked at Harry. She looked at the mother box, then she sat down. They talked until the sky outside the library window went from black to the particular deep blue that came before dawn. Harry did most of the listening and Becca did most of the talking, which he suspected was unusual for her. She had the manner of someone who didn't often explain things because she didn't often encounter people who needed explanation. But she explained. The Fourth World. The war between New Genesis and Apocalypse that had burned out old universes and left new gods as the inheritors. Darkseid's obsession with the anti-life equation, not a mathematical formula but a fundamental proof that free will was an illusion, that self-determination was delusion, and that once Darkseid could demonstrate that proof absolutely, every sentient being in every universe would simply stop choosing, stop wanting, stop being themselves, become part of his will like cells in a body. That's what he wants, Harry said, not rulership. He does not want to rule, Becca confirmed. He wants to end the concept of the self. Every being that has ever wanted something, chosen something, loved something, all of it negated all at once permanently. Harry thought about that. He thought about it the way he thought about Voldemort's Horcruxes the first time he'd heard about them, that cold, clear, factual understanding of a horror. And the mother box is part of the equation. The mother box does not give him the equation, but it is an interface with the source, and the source is the only place where the final component of the anti-life proof can be read. If Darkseid holds the mother box and a being bonded to the source, he can use the connection to access what he needs. She paused. He would not destroy you, he would keep you, alive and in agony and useful for as long as it took. The room was very quiet. Right, Harry said, so not dying is important. Yes, good, I'm quite committed to that one. He looked at the mother box, which was doing something new with its circuitry, running what he'd come to think of as its conversation pattern, the specific configuration it took when information was being processed and cross-referenced. Can I show you something? He didn't wait for her answer. He picked up his wand and held the mother box simultaneously, and he cast. Not a standard spell, something he'd been developing in the kitchen at Privet Drive. A thing that didn't have a name yet because it was new. A combination of transfiguration intent writing, a wave of source energy that was somewhere between reshaping matter and rewriting local physics. The shelf of books along the far wall rearranged itself alphabetically by the mood it would produce in a reader rather than by title or author, a classification that required the energy to understand the books rather than just move them. Becca watched it happen. Both simultaneously, she said. Yeah, the source and the magic together. Harry looked at the neatly organized shelves. Magic gives the source structure. The source gives the magic amplitude. Neither one limits the other. That should not be possible, Becca said. Structured magical systems are closed. They define their own parameters. The source is unbounded. The two should be incompatible. One should overwhelm the other. Mine don't. She was looking at him with something new in her expression. Still the gold eyes, still the precise attention, but now with something underneath it that was closer to wonder than anything she'd shown so far, carefully contained and disciplined, but there. No, she said quietly, they don't. A pause. You are something that should not exist. Been told that before, Harry said. I find I don't take it as badly as I used to. That almost smile again. I will teach you, she said, what you are and what you can do. She looked at the mother box. The box chose correctly. It cost her something to say it, he thought, not the content but the admission that a plan she'd had for 11 years had been permanently altered. She would have approved of you. Harry knew she meant the woman who had hidden the box. He didn't say anything to that because some things needed no response, and he was learning slowly when not to fill silences. They sat together in the library until dawn properly broke and voices began upstairs and the house started its morning noises. And Becca's hand rested on the table between them, the gold of her eyes dimmed to something quieter in the morning light, and Harry thought that this was what it felt like to meet someone on something like level ground. Dumbledore came at noon. Harry was in the kitchen when the fireplace flared, and he watched Dumbledore step through with all his customary grace and look immediately around the room until his eyes found Harry. And whatever he had been expecting to find, whatever configuration of Harry he had prepared his words for, was clearly not what he saw. Harry, he said, and the warmth in his voice was real. Harry had never doubted that it was the method that was the problem. Professor. Harry stayed at the table. He had the mother box in his hand on the tabletop, not hidden, not displayed, just present. Sit down, there's something we need to talk about. Dumbledore's eyes went to the mother box and stopped. For the first time in the years Harry had known him, something in his face went entirely, genuinely unreadable. Not controlled, actually thrown, he sat down. Where did you find that? He said, and his voice was different, quieter, missing its usual layered composure. Surrey, Harry said, buried under a church. He paused. You know what it is? A long silence. I know of it, Dumbledore said finally. I know of the civilization that created objects like this. I have known for some time that one was hidden somewhere in Britain. His eyes moved from the box to Harry's face. I did not know it was in Surrey, and I did not know, he stopped. How long have you had it? Since early July. Another silence, longer. Harry could see him working through the implications, the careful reassembly of a picture that had just had all its pieces scattered. Harry, he said, you understand what this means, what will come looking for it. Darkseid, Harry said, yes, I've had a briefing. He held Dumbledore's gaze. From Becca, she's a new god from New Genesis. She arrived last night, she's upstairs. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with those pale blue eyes, and Harry saw something in them that he'd never quite seen before, the recognition of a version of events that had moved beyond planning. The quiet adjustment of a man who had managed things for a very long time, encountering something he could not manage. You've been busy, Dumbledore said softly. I've been learning, Harry said, which isn't the same thing. He set both hands flat on the table on either side of the mother box. I'm not going to give it to you, if that's part of what you were going to suggest. I wasn't going to, Dumbledore started. Professor. Harry's voice was calm, not combative, not angry, just certain. I know you, and I know that when you see something this powerful near someone this young, your first instinct is to find a reason to separate them for their own protection. He looked at him steadily. The box is bonded to me, separation would kill me, so that argument doesn't work. And even if it did, I'm not the same person I was at the end of term, things have changed. He paused. I'd like to work with you, but I'm done having things managed. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. And then he said, tell me everything. Harry picked up the mother box. That, he said, is exactly what I was going to do. Chapter 3, 2 Kinds of War. Hogwarts in September felt different. Harry noticed at the moment the castle came into view from the lake, the way it sat against the darkening sky, ancient and enormous, and how for the first time in 5 years it didn't feel like a refuge so much as a stage, like something was going to happen here, like the stones knew it too. He was sitting at the back of one of the boats with the first years, which he wasn't supposed to be doing. Fifth years took the carriages, but he'd wanted the lake crossing, wanted the approach, wanted to see it from water level the way he'd first seen it at 11. The first years gave him a wide berth which suited him. He'd needed the 10 minutes of quiet. The mother box was in his inside pocket. It always was. The feast was loud and warm and golden in the way Hogwarts feasts always were. And Harry sat between Ron and Hermione and ate and listened and let the noise wash over him. Neville was across the table talking about his summer with an animation that suggested it had been better than usual. Ginny was 3 seats down, laughing at something Fred had said. The sorting happened and new students found their places and the hall filled and contracted with its usual rhythm. Then Umbridge stood up. Harry had been warned about Umbridge in the general sense. Moody had mentioned her, ministry appointment, oversight role, all of it, but nothing about the warning had quite prepared him for the reality of her. She was small and pink and smiling in the particular way that a thing smiled when the smile was doing a job that had nothing to do with happiness. Her robes were the exact color of something Harry couldn't place for a moment, and then he placed it. The color of official ministry documents. It wasn't an accident. She gave her speech, the one about progress and pruning and the ministry's ongoing commitment to excellence in magical education. And she said educational decrees twice and appropriate boundaries 3 times. And Harry listened to every word of it with the same quality of attention he'd been developing since July, the kind that went underneath the stated content to what was actually being communicated. What was actually being communicated was, the ministry doesn't trust Dumbledore, the ministry doesn't trust the students, the ministry is here to make sure certain things are not discussed, and anyone who disagrees with this arrangement will find it uncomfortable to do so. She's dreadful, Hermione said quietly. She's a tool, Harry said, equally quiet. Someone sent her here for a specific reason. He ate another bite of roast. We should find out exactly what that reason is before we react to it. Ron looked at him sideways. When did you start strategizing at dinner? July, Harry said. Becca was not at Hogwarts. That had been part of the conversation with Dumbledore. She couldn't be, not openly, not in a school full of children and teachers who would require explanations that would use up time they didn't have. But she was close. She had a way of being close that Harry had already learned. A boom tube could cross any distance in seconds, and she had given him a way to signal her that didn't involve anything as visible as magic or as traceable as owl post. The mother box itself served as the connection, a particular frequency he could emit through it that she would feel regardless of where she was. He hadn't needed to use it yet. He settled into Hogwarts the way water settled into a new container, finding its level, taking the shape of the space without losing its own. Classes resumed. He paid attention in ways he hadn't before, not because the material was suddenly more interesting. Dada under Umbridge was actively insulting, a fact he'd established within the first 15 minutes of her opening lecture on theoretical defensive principles that she apparently thought could be learned without ever performing them, but because he was developing a new relationship with magical theory that the mother box had accelerated dramatically. He understood now why spells worked the way they worked. Not just the mechanics, the physics. Every spell was a structured request to the source, made through the medium of magical intent and focused via a wand. The wand was essentially a translator. It took the imprecise electrical emotional signal of a human mind and rendered it into something the source could parse as a specific instruction, which meant that anything a wand could do, a sufficiently precise mind and a sufficiently clear connection to the source could do without one. He didn't advertise this. Not because he was hiding. He'd told himself in July he was done hiding, and he meant it. But because there was a difference between not hiding and putting on a show, and the second one had never interested him. Hermione cornered him on the 3rd day. She did it well too, waited until they had a free period where Ron had gone to the library for Quidditch statistics, and then simply appeared beside him in the corridor outside Charms as if she'd been there all along and said, "Right, what happened this summer?" Not a question. Harry looked at her. She looked back with those sharp, determined eyes, the ones that had been scanning him for anomalies since Grimald Place, collecting data points and waiting for enough of them to triangulate a conclusion. "Let's find somewhere quieter," he said. They ended up in an empty classroom on the third floor, the kind of room Hogwarts seemed to generate specifically for conversations that needed to happen away from corridors. Harry sat on a desk, and Hermione stood in front of him with her arms crossed, and he took the mother box out of his pocket and put it on the desk beside him. She looked at it for 3 full seconds. "What is that?" she said with the specific tone of someone who already knew that the answer was going to be large. "It's called a mother box," he told her, all of it. He'd gotten better at telling it. The story had a shape now. It moved from discovery to bonding to the source to new gods to Becca to Darkseid, and he'd learned where to slow down and where to accelerate through the structural explanation and where the emotional content needed room. Hermione listened the way she listened to things that mattered, absolutely still, eyes moving only to shift between his face and the box, processing continuously. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The source is the unified field." "What?" "In Muggle physics, theoretical physics, there's this concept of a unified field theory, the idea that all fundamental forces are expressions of one underlying principle. Gravity, electromagnetism, the nuclear forces, all one thing at root. Wizards don't talk about it because wizards have never needed to think about why magic works, just that it does." She was pacing now, that short, rapid stride she took when her mind was running faster than her body. "But if the source is the substrate, if it's the actual unified field, then of course magic draws from it. Magic is just the version of it that's accessible to beings with the right kind of consciousness. And what you're doing," she stopped. "Combining structured magical intent with direct source access, you're operating at 2 levels of the same system simultaneously. That's more or less what Becca said." "Becca sounds sensible." Hermione looked at the mother box. "Can I touch it?" "You can try, it'll probably just feel warm, it doesn't bond to." She put her hand on it. The mother box pulsed once, a single clear note, and Hermione's eyes went wide. "It said something," she said, "not in words, but I know." She took her hand away carefully. Her expression was the particular one she wore when she'd been given something that was going to occupy her for the next several months. "It recognized me," she said, "as associated with you." "You're one of the people I trust most," Harry said simply. She stared at him for a moment. Then she sat down on the desk beside him and was quiet for a while in the way that meant she was organizing rather than processing, building structure around something she'd already absorbed. "Voldemort," she said finally. "Yeah, he doesn't know yet. Not about the box. He felt me push him out in July. He'll have spent 2 months trying to work out what it was." Harry looked at the ceiling. "He'll try again. He's not the kind of person who doesn't try again. And Darkseid will send something before he comes himself. That's how beings like him operate: probes, scouts, messengers. He'll want to understand what he's dealing with before he commits." Harry paused. "Becca says he's patient. He's been looking for the box for over a decade and he hasn't made a move yet." Hermione was quiet again. "Then, Harry, if Darkseid is after the mother box and the mother box is bonded to you, you're the target, not the box. I know. And you're not," she gestured vaguely at him. "You seem very calm about this." Harry looked at her. "What's the alternative?" he said. "Being afraid of it doesn't change the situation. Understanding it does." He picked up the mother box and it sang quietly in his hand. "I'm not what I was in June, Hermione. I know that's strange, and I know you need time to get used to it, and I know you're going to want to read everything you can find about new god cosmology, which is why I've already asked Becca to put together a list of—" "You've already asked her." She stared at him. "You knew I'd want Hermione." He almost smiled. "Of course I knew." She looked at him for another moment, this person she'd known for 4 years who was still clearly himself and was also clearly something more, and he watched her decide, consciously, visibly, the decision moving across her face to meet him where he was rather than asking him to come back to where he'd been. "Right," she said briskly. "I'll need everything she has, and I'm going to want to meet her." "Saturday," Harry said. "I'll arrange it." Defense against the dark arts under Dolar's umbrage was not so much a class as a demonstration of the Ministry's fear. Harry understood this in the same way he understood everything now, clearly, without the anger-first reaction he'd have had before July. Umbridge wasn't stupid. She was implementing a specific brief with precision and even a kind of professional competence, the competence of someone who believed completely in the institution they served. The problem was the institution, not the implementation. She wanted them to read about defensive magic without practicing it, because practicing it implied they expected to need it. And needing it implied that Voldemort was real and returned, and the Ministry had decided Voldemort was neither. In the 3rd class, she asked them to turn to Chapter 2, the Principles of Defensive Theory as Applied to Non-Threatening Magical Encounters. "Professor," Harry said pleasantly. She turned from the board with a smile that wasn't one. "Yes, Mr. Potter. If we're not going to practice defensive magic, what exactly are we going to do when we need to use it?" The class went very quiet. "The Ministry," she said, with the particular sweetness of someone choosing their words as weapons, "does not anticipate that students at Hogwarts will be placed in situations requiring practical defensive magic." "The Ministry was wrong about that last year," Harry said. "And the year before. And the year before that." Now, Mr. Potter," the smile tightened. "We mustn't let our imagination run away with us. The events of last term, Cedric Diggory died," Harry said, not loudly, not aggressively, just clearly the way you stated facts. "In front of me, and the only reason I came back was because I knew how to cast a priori incantatem under pressure. That's practical application. You can't get that from reading." He opened his book. "But I'll read the chapter." The class breathed out. Umbridge stared at him with eyes that were recalculating something. He met her gaze without flinching, without heat, and after a moment she turned back to the board. Ron passed him a note that said mental. In the best way, Harry folded it and put it in his pocket. After class, walking through the corridor, Hermione said quietly, "She's going to make your life difficult." "She's going to try," Harry said, "but she's working from an old model of who I am." He looked ahead down the corridor at the moving portraits and the filtered afternoon light and the ordinary beautiful strangeness of Hogwarts. That model isn't accurate anymore. The first DA meeting happened not because of a plan, but because of a question. Neville asked it of all people in the corridor after Umbridge's fourth class, with that particular Neville quality of saying true things that more self-conscious people would have kept quiet. He fell into step beside Harry and Ron and said, "Can you teach us?" Harry looked at him. "Proper defensive magic," Neville said. He wasn't embarrassed by the question. He was just Neville, which meant he asked things because he needed to know them, not because it was comfortable. "What she's teaching isn't going to help anyone. But you've done things, actual things, not theory," and he stopped, gathered himself. "My parents were hit by the Cruciatus curse so badly they don't know who I am anymore. And I've been a passenger in every dangerous thing that's happened since first year, and I'm done being a passenger." The corridor was busy around them, students moving between classes, and Neville stood in the middle of it with his jaw set and his eyes direct, and Harry felt something move in his chest that was respect, clear and uncomplicated. "Yeah," Harry said, "I can teach you." The word spread the way words spread at Hogwarts, person to person, with the organic efficiency of a place where information moved through stone walls as readily as through air. By the time Harry, Ron, and Hermione had worked out the logistics, 25 people had expressed interest, which became the Hog's Head meeting, which became the parchment list, which became the agreement that they were going to do this. Harry stood in front of the Hog's Head gathering and looked at the faces, Neville and Ginny and Luna and the twins and the Hufflepuffs and the Ravenclaws, and all the people who had chosen to be here because they understood something was coming and they wanted to be ready for it, and felt the particular weight of being trusted. "I'm not going to pretend this is just extra practice," he said. "You're here because you know what's actually happening, and I'm not going to insult that. Voldemort is back, that's real. The Ministry doesn't want to know it. Umbridge is here to make sure we don't say it out loud or prepare for it." He looked around the room. "I'm going to teach you everything I know, not watered down, not theoretical. Real defensive magic, real combat technique, real application. And I'm going to be honest with you, I can do things now that I couldn't do in June, and some of it might look strange, and if it does, just ask me about it directly." A hand went up. Zacharias Smith. "What kind of things?" Smith said, with the skepticism of someone who wanted it on record that they'd asked. Harry pointed his wand at the low table between them, and without a word and without visible effort it rose 6 feet off the floor, rotated 90 degrees, and reassembled itself at a slightly different angle with 2 extra chairs around it that had come from across the room. Several people stared. "That kind of things," Harry said. "Questions." The first meeting of what would become the DA was 2 weeks later in the Room of Requirement, which Harry had found not through the map or through advice but through the Mother Box, which had navigated the castle's magical infrastructure with the ease of a device that operated on the same underlying energy and found the room's resonance like pressing a thumb to a pulse. He ran them hard. Not unkindly, he remembered what it felt like to not know things, and he taught with that memory active, but seriously, because the situation was serious, and they deserved to be treated like people capable of rising to that. He moved through the room correcting stance and wand angle and intention, watching spell work and adjusting, answering questions and asking them back. Ron, to his own visible surprise, was excellent at Expelliarmus. There was something in the uncomplicated directness of the spell that matched something in Ron's character, and when he got it right, it had a snap to it that made the target go flying. Hermione had been excellent at everything for years, but Harry watched her now with the specific attention of someone who understood more of the mechanics. And he saw things he could help her improve. A tendency to over-enunciate that added half a second to her casting time, a slight hesitation before combat magic that was the residue of a personality that preferred to not fight, and he worked on both with her quietly between the larger group sessions. Neville's Expelliarmus was shaky. His impedimenta was not. "You're angrier than you look," Harry told him, after watching the third consecutive impedimenta land with significantly more force than the exercise required. Neville went red. "Sorry, don't apologize, use it, there's nothing wrong with angry. Angry has kept me alive more than once." Harry reset the practice target. "Just make sure you know what you're angry for, not just at. Anger with a direction is power, anger without one is noise." Neville looked at him with those steady eyes. "My parents," he said quietly. "Yeah," Harry said, "that's a direction." 3 weeks into term, Voldemort moved. Harry felt it first, a push at the boundary of the connection between them, harder and more deliberate than the tentative probe in July. Testing whether whatever had pushed back then was still active. Testing whether it was a fluke. Harry was in transfiguration when it happened, and he put his quill down and focused inward, finding the thread of it, following it to its source the way you followed a sound back to its origin, and then he did something that was neither a clumency nor anything else he had a name for, something the mother box had been teaching him by increments for the past weeks. He reached along the connection and he looked back. Voldemort felt him looking. The push dropped away so fast it was almost funny. Harry picked up his quill and went back to his notes. McGonagall, at the front of the room, was discussing the theory of human transfiguration and had not noticed anything. Under the desk, the mother box pulsed once, acknowledged. That evening, alone in the dormitory while Ron was at Quidditch practice, Harry sat on his bed and thought about what he'd seen in that half-second of returned contact. Just an impression, just a flash, but enough. Voldemort was in a large stone room somewhere cold with others present. He had been trying to probe Harry's mind for information about something specific. Something that had his attention more than Harry himself did, which was unusual. The mother box. He knew about it somehow, or knew about something. Not specifically a mother box, maybe, but knew that something had changed, something that was in Harry's possession, something that had broken the connection in July in a way that his own power hadn't managed. And Voldemort, whose entire existence was the pursuit of power, was trying to find out what it was. Harry lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling. He's going to come after it, he thought. Sooner or later, he's going to try for it. The mother box hummed steadily, and through it Harry felt something from Becca, not a message, just a presence, a check-in, the cosmological equivalent of a knock on a door to confirm someone was home. He sent something back, aware, not urgent. "We'll contact if it changes." The hum settled. Harry closed his eyes. Outside, he could hear the distant sounds of Quidditch practice, Ron shouting something at a bludger, the familiar Hogwarts evening wrapping the day up. Inside, something was building. He could feel it the way you felt whether before it arrived, in the pressure of things, in the way the air sat differently, in the quality of silence between ordinary sounds. Something was coming, not tonight, but soon. He opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling and said to himself and to the box and to whatever was coming, "Whenever you're ready." The castle did not answer. But something in it, something old and deep that had survived 1,000 years of human drama and magical war and the continuous vibration of living, seemed to notice, seemed to settle, seemed to say without saying anything at all, "This time will be different." Harry thought so too. Umbridge found out about the DA 6 days later. She came to the Gryffindor common room herself. With 2 members of the inquisitorial squad she'd assembled from students who had that particular combination of mediocrity and ambient cruelty that made them useful tools for small-minded authority. And she had a parchment in her hand, the sign-up list, which had been jinxed by Hermione to betray anyone who showed it to a teacher and had apparently done exactly that. And her face was doing the smile that meant she had found the outcome she had been manufacturing since the start of term. Harry was sitting by the fire with the DA list's apparent consequences when she came in. The common room went quiet. "Mr. Potter," Umbridge said with the sweetness that was a weapon. "I believe this belongs to you." She held up the parchment. Harry looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at the 2 inquisitorial squad members behind her, fifth-year Slytherins whose expressions suggested they had very much enjoyed whatever sequence of events had led them here. "You've been running an unauthorized student organization," Umbridge said. "In direct violation of Educational Decree No. 24, which prohibits—" "I know what it prohibits," Harry said pleasantly. He did not stand up. He did not adjust his posture. He sat exactly as he'd been sitting, comfortable and unhurried, and looked up at her with the particular quality of calm that she'd been trying to crack since September and that had apparently not cracked. I've read all the educational decrees. I read them when they came out, which was interesting timing, wasn't it? 24 of them all in the first week of term. Umbridge blinked. The smile stayed, but its quality changed. I'm afraid I'll have to report this to the headmaster, she said. Go ahead, Harry said. Professor Dumbledore already knows about the study group. I told him myself 3 weeks ago as a courtesy. This was technically true. He'd mentioned it briefly in the context of a much larger conversation. If you'd like to discuss it with him, his office is on the 7th floor. He opened his book again. Was there anything else? The common room was very still. Umbridge stood with the parchment in her hand and her smile frozen, and her 2 inquisitorial squad members looking slightly less satisfied than they had 30 seconds ago, and Harry looked at his book with the complete equanimity of someone who was no longer afraid of pink cardigans. This isn't over, Mr. Potter, she said softly. I didn't think it was. He turned a page. Good night, Professor, she left. The common room exhaled. Several people looked at Harry with expressions ranging from admiration to the specific fear of someone standing near lightning. Neville from across the room gave him a small nod. Ron leaned over from the chair beside him and said very quietly, You're going to give her an aneurysm. She'll be fine, Harry said. She's the ministry's problem, not mine. He looked back at his book. We've got bigger things to worry about. And 300 miles away, in a cold stone room, something stirred that was the beginning of a much larger problem than Dolar's Umbridge. Something that had finally, after months of searching, identified the signal it was looking for. Something old and vast and immovable in its purpose that turned its attention slowly toward a castle in Scotland and a boy who carried a singing box against his chest. The Parademons would arrive before the end of October. Harry didn't know that yet, but the mother box did. Its circuitry ran faster that night, the patterns more complex, preparing. Outside Hogwarts, the stars were very clear. Chapter 4, The Omega finds its mark. The Parademons came on a Wednesday. Harry knew they were coming approximately 4 minutes before they arrived, which was enough time to do 3 things. Get Ron and Hermione out of the 3 broomsticks where they'd been sitting with butterbeer and a shared charms essay, send the mother box signal to Becca, and get to the high street of Hogsmeade before the first of them tore through the low cloud cover like a stone through paper. There were 12 of them in the first wave. They were wrong in the way things from outside the natural order were wrong. Not monstrous in any way that mapped to the monsters Harry knew. Not like in fairy or dementors or anything that had evolved alongside human fear. They were constructed wrong, the proportions of them suggesting a design process that had never consulted anything like aesthetics or mercy, gray-green and winged, and moving with the mechanical certainty of things that had a specific target and no secondary concerns. The street emptied fast. Hogsmeade on a Hogsmeade weekend was full of students, and Harry could hear the shouting and the running and the percussion of shop doors slamming as people cleared the street. And he stood in the middle of the cobblestones and watched the Parademons descend, and felt the mother box go sharp and bright against his chest, and felt the source open under him like a depth he'd been standing above all along. A Parademon hit the ground 10 feet in front of him. It was bigger up close. It looked at him with eyes that were not eyes, targeting systems, the mother box told him, feeding information back to Apocalypse in real time, this whole encounter being recorded and transmitted, and it made a sound that was somewhere between a screech and a radio frequency and lunged. Harry moved, not out of the way, through it. He dropped low and let the source push through him and out through his right hand in a pulse that was nothing like a spell and nothing like anything in a wizarding textbook, raw structured energy. The same stuff reality was made of, used as a blunt instrument, and the Parademon hit it and went sideways into the wall of Honeydukes hard enough to crack the stone. It got up. Harry raised his wand in his left hand. He'd been practicing ambidextrous casting since August, and hit it with a reducto that had source amplitude behind it, which meant the reducto arrived with approximately 5 times the force of a standard casting, which meant the Parademon did not get up again. Harry, Hermione's voice from behind him. He didn't look back. Get people into the shops, he said. Lock the doors, don't come out until I call you. I'm not going to, Hermione. He caught the second Parademon with a wandless burst that flattened it against the cobblestones and held it there with continuous pressure while he dealt with the third, which had come in from his left and was fast enough that he had to actually move to avoid it. I need you to not be something I have to protect right now, please. A beat. He heard Ron say something to her. He heard her sharp exhale of frustration, which was almost endearing, and then the sound of them moving, not into a shop, he noted, but into a doorway where they had a sightline and cover, which was Hermione's version of following instructions. He turned to the remaining 10. The thing about fighting Parademons was that they were not individually intelligent. They were tactical but not strategic, which meant they would coordinate but not adapt, which meant once he understood their coordination patterns, which took about 40 seconds, he could work inside them. The mother box was feeding him information continuously, overlaying his perception with targeting data and structural weaknesses and the particular frequency vulnerabilities of apocalyptic biotechnology. And he was using it not as a crutch but as a layer, the same way a musician used a score while still playing, reading, and performing simultaneously, the information and the action running in parallel. He took 3 of them with a single casting, a wide arc confringo riding a source wave. The explosion structured carefully enough that it hit the parademons and not the buildings around them, which required a precision that would have been impossible 6 months ago and was now, if not easy, then at least achievable. 2 more went down to straightforward wandless blasts, the kind of direct source application that still amazed him a little, the sensation of reaching into the fabric of things and pushing. The remaining 5 regrouped. He watched them do it, the subtle shift in their formation, the way they adjusted angles to come at him from multiple directions simultaneously, preventing him from having a clean line on more than one at a time. It was a decent tactic. It would have worked on a wizard. Harry took a breath and let the source come up fully, not in pulses, not in directed bursts, but as a continuous state, the way you could breathe out and then keep breathing out, finding that there was more than you'd thought, and he felt it move through him and around him, and he expanded. The 5 parademons hit a wall of source energy that hadn't been visible until they were in it, and then they stopped. Not physically restrained, they kept moving, kept fighting, but they were fighting the substrate of reality itself, and they were not strong enough for that. One by one, in quick succession, they went down. Harry stood in the middle of Hogsmeade High Street in the quiet that followed and breathed. The street was wrecked. Cobblestones cracked and displaced, the Honeyjuke's wall punched in, a lamppost bent at a 40-degree angle, smoke from something that had caught briefly and been put out. 12 parademon forms scattered across the street in various states of incapacitation, and 30 feet away, Ron and Hermione in their doorway staring at him. 12, Ron said. First wave, Harry said. First, there's a second wave. The sky answered that. Not parademons this time, the cloud cover was doing something wrong, a darkness that wasn't weather, a pressure drop that the mother box identified immediately and that Harry felt in the back of his teeth like a frequency too low for proper hearing. A boom tube opened above Hogsmeade. Not the clean golden ring of Becca's arrivals, but something corrupted, red-edged, smelling of ozone and something sulfurous. And what came through it was not another wave of parademons. It was Calibac. Harry had seen images, the mother box had shown him, as part of its ongoing cosmological education, but images were not preparation. Calibac was the son of Darkseid, which meant he was a new god, which meant he existed in a register of power that made the parademons look like training equipment. He was large in the way that made the word seem inadequate, perhaps 9 feet tall and half that wide, covered in armor that was made of something that wasn't metal in any conventional sense, carrying a weapon he called the Beta Club that was a rod of impossible density that warped gravitational fields in its vicinity just by existing. Hit the street and the cobblestones cracked in a 4-foot radius from impact. He looked at Harry. The bonded one, Calibac said with the voice of something that had destroyed cities and found the experience pleasant. My father sends his interest. His interest can wait, Harry said. He was already moving the mother box higher, feeding it more connection, letting the source come up to the level this situation required. Calibac smiled, which was a deeply unpleasant thing to see. You are small. Cedric Diggory's killer was short, Harry said. I've stopped using size as a metric. Calibac moved. He was faster than he looked. Another way the scale of him was deceptive, and the Beta Club came down at an angle that was designed to catch Harry regardless of which direction he stepped. Harry didn't step. He went up. Not with a broom, not with any propulsion spell he'd have used before, the source applied as thrust beneath him, lifting him 6 feet off the street in a single clean motion, and the Beta Club took out half the cobblestones where he'd been standing. The gravitational distortion from the impact hit him even at 6 feet, and he felt it in his bones, the way the world went briefly wrong around the weapon, and he noted it and adjusted his plan around it. Can fly, Calibac observed. Interesting. I'm full of surprises, Harry said from 6 feet up. He sent 3 things at Calibac simultaneously. A source pulse aimed at the armor's structural matrix, a reducto at the joint of his right shoulder where the mother box had identified a vulnerability in the design, and a gravitational inversion. He'd been working on this for weeks. The application of source energy in the specific configuration that reversed local gravity focused on the Beta Club itself. The armor held against the source pulse. It was good armor. The reducto hit the shoulder joint, and Calibac's right arm jerked, and the grip on the Beta Club shifted. The gravitational inversion made the weapon try to go up while Calabac was swinging it down, and the resulting mechanical conflict wrenched the weapon sideways with enough force that Calabac stumbled. New gods did not stumble often. Calabac looked at the cobblestones with an expression of genuine surprise, then looked up at Harry. "You are not what was expected," he said. "No," Harry said, "I'm not." He came down fast, not a drop, a controlled descent at speed, and hit Calabac's center mass with the most concentrated source burst he'd managed yet. The kind of thing that the mother box had been building him toward for months, structured intent meeting raw amplitude at a point of perfect focus. And it wasn't enough to put Calabac down. He was a new god and nothing about this was going to be easy, but it hit him like a wall, like physics disagreeing with his existence. And he went backward 12 feet and hit the facade of the post office, and the wall cracked around him. Calabac stood in the crater of the wall and looked at Harry, and this time when he smiled it was different. Not the easy superiority of before. Something that was almost respect, in the specific language of beings for whom the only currency of respect was the ability to hurt you. "The master will want to meet you," Calabac said. "The feeling isn't mutual," Harry said. He raised his wand and let the source come through it, the wand as amplifier, as the structured channel that let him put specific intent on the source energy rather than raw force, and what came out was nothing from any spell book. A white gold beam of structured reality that hit Calabac in the chest and pushed him back through the wall of the post office and through the room inside and through the back wall and into the alley beyond. Harry heard him hit something in the alley, then silence. He held his position. His wand was still up. The mother box was running hot against his chest, the circuitry at its maximum complexity, and through it he could feel Becca getting closer. She was maybe 90 seconds away, coming through a boom tube of her own, and she was angry in the particular controlled way she was angry when a situation was worse than her intelligence suggested it would be. From the alley, the sound of something large picking itself up. "Okay," Harry said under his breath. "We do this the long way." Becca arrived in the middle of the second exchange, and she arrived like a weapon discharged. Her boom tube opened at street level and she was through it without breaking stride, sword already in hand. And she assessed the situation in the 3 seconds it took her to cross the distance. Calabac in the alley, emerging back through the hole in the post office wall with his expression recalibrated to something that was significantly less certain than it had been when he arrived. Harry in the street, standing easy, not breathing particularly hard. With the light of the source moving in his hands in a way that was visible now, golden white, tracing his fingers like current, she took up position at his left shoulder. "You should have called me sooner," she said. "I had it." 12 parademons and Calabac. "I had it," he repeated without heat. A pause. "Yes," she said, and there was something in that single word that was assessment passed and something found satisfactory. "You did." Calabac looked at Becca and the expression that moved across his face was interesting, not fear exactly, but the recognition of a specific threat, a history between them that the mother box summarized for Harry in quick impressions. Long rivalry, 3 prior encounters Becca has never lost. "New Genesis sends their warrior," Calabac said. "And the boy." "The boy has a name," Becca said. "Father knows his name." Calabac was still moving, not retreating, repositioning, the beta club held in a two-handed grip now, the right arm still slightly off from the reducto that had hit the shoulder joint. "My father knows what he is, what he carries." The yellow eyes moved to Harry with something that wasn't quite hunger but was related to it. "The anti-life will be complete. The boy's connection to the source is the last piece. It is a matter of time." "I've heard that kind of talk before," Harry said. "The Dark Lord's going to win. It's inevitable. Resistance is pointless." He tilted his head. "It doesn't tend to age well." Calabac moved, the real move, not posturing, the full weight of a new god in combat, and Becca was already there. Her blade intercepting the beta club with a clash that sent visible shockwaves in both directions along the street. And Harry was moving simultaneously, targeting the beta club again, the gravitational inversion wider this time, applied to a larger volume. The weapon went up. Calabac's grip held but his trajectory didn't. He was fighting both Becca's sword and physics. And physics is a fundamentally unreasonable opponent. He went sideways, the sword left a score across the armor that sparked with the specific light of new god metallurgy being properly challenged. And Harry hit him from the other side with a source pulse that he'd been building since Becca arrived, holding it in reserve. Calabac went down. Not out, new gods didn't go out easily, but down, one knee on the destroyed cobblestones, the beta club buried in the street beside him where the gravitational inversion had pulled it. His armor showing 3 points of genuine damage. He looked up at Harry and Becca standing above him, and something moved in his face that was probably the closest Calabac ever got to reconsideration. "Tell your father," Harry said, "that this isn't the outcome he projected." Calabac reached for his arm, a device on the wrist. Becca moved to stop it, but Harry put a hand on her arm. "Let him go," Harry said quietly. She looked at him sharply. "He'll go back and report what happened," Harry said. "That's useful. Darkseid will see what he's dealing with. It changes his calculations." A pause. "And killing a new god in the middle of Hogsmeade when there are students in the building seems like a lot of unnecessary mess." Becca looked at him for a moment with those gold eyes. Then she stepped back. Calabac's boom tube opened and he went through it, and it closed, and the street was empty and wrecked and quiet. From behind him, Ron said, "Blimey." Harry turned around. Ron and Hermione were out of their doorway now, Ron with his wand out and an expression of someone who had just watched something he would be talking about for the rest of his life. Hermione with her wand also out and a face that was doing several things at once, the primary one being a kind of fierce, terrified, proud love that she would probably not describe in those terms. "Are you hurt?" she said. Harry looked himself over, mostly as confirmation. We didn't do anything," Ron said. He gestured at the demolished street. "Watched you do that." "Becca helped," Harry said. Becca, who had sheathed her sword and was looking at the damage with the expression of a person calculating cleanup logistics, said, "Marginally." "Significantly," Harry said, because it was true and she deserved that. Ron looked at Becca. He'd heard about her, but this was the first time he'd actually seen her. And he did the visual inventory that Ron always did: armor, sword, gold eyes, the indefinable quality of ancientness that new gods carried, and then said with absolute genuine respect, "Wicked." Something in Becca's expression shifted. Harry thought it might be the closest she came to charmed. The aftermath was complicated in the way that aftermath tended to be. The students who had been in the shops during the fight emerged to a wrecked Hogsmeade Street, and a Harry Potter standing in the middle of it next to a woman who was clearly not a wizard and clearly not entirely human, and the story spread back to Hogwarts at a speed that made Owl Post look glacial. Dumbledore arrived within the hour. He walked down the damaged street with McGonagall and Sprout behind him and looked at the paradement forms and the cracked stone and the hole in the post office wall, and then he looked at Harry, and the look on his face was not surprised. Something past surprised. Something that was grappling with the distance between his understanding of what Harry was and the evidence in front of him. "Parademons," he said, "and Calabac." "Yes," Harry said, "you sent Calabac away." "He'd have taken a while to put down permanently, and there were students 30 feet away," Harry said. "He went back with a report. Darkseid will know what he's dealing with now." Dumbledore looked at Becca, who returned the look with the complete equanimity of someone who had met far older and more powerful beings than Albus Dumbledore and respected them just fine without needing to perform it. "You are the warrior he mentioned," Dumbledore said. "Becca of New Genesis," she said. "You are the one who manages him." "I am the headmaster," Dumbledore said carefully. "That is not what I said." The pause that followed was brief but significant. "The Ministry," McGonagall said, looking at the street, with the tone of someone whose head of house instincts had just encountered a problem with no established protocol. "The Ministry," Harry agreed, "is going to have a lot of questions." "I can manage the Ministry," Dumbledore said. "You can manage the explanation," Harry said. "What you can't manage is the fact that Darkseid now knows the Mother Box is at Hogwarts." He looked at the sky, still overcast, the cloud cover that had preceded the attack still sitting heavy. "He sent scouts. Next time it'll be something more serious. We need to talk about what that preparation looks like." Dumbledore looked at him with those pale blue eyes, and Harry looked back without moving, without deferring, just waiting, and after a moment Dumbledore said, "Yes, we do." Ron found him on the astronomy tower that evening, which was where Harry went when he needed to think and also when he needed the sky. The tower was cold and the stars were out now, the clouds from the afternoon gone, and Harry was sitting on the parapet with his legs over the edge and the Mother Box in his hands, running his thumbs over the circuitry in the absent way he did when he was processing. Ron came up the stairs and looked at the parapet and said, "You know, most people use the parapet as a thing to stand behind." "The height doesn't bother me anymore," Harry said. "Come sit." Ron sat beside him on the parapet with considerably more care and a visible commitment to not looking directly down. They sat in silence for a bit, which was one of the things Harry valued about Ron, his willingness to be in silence without needing to fill it, to just be present without an agenda. "You were brilliant today," Ron said finally. "I was effective," Harry said. "Brilliant would have been preventing it from happening in Hogsmeade at all." "You had 4 minutes warning," Ron said. "And there were 12 parademons and a bloody enormous, what was he, new god, Calabac, Darkseid's son." "Darkseid's son," Ron absorbed this. "And Darkseid is the actual problem," Harry said. "Everything else, Voldemort, Umbridge, the Ministry, it's all real and it all matters, but Darkseid is the problem that ends everything if it isn't solved." He looked at the stars. "He wants to end free will, not metaphorically, actually end it, permanently." Ron was quiet for a moment. "How?" "Something called the anti-life equation. The Mother Box is the last piece he needs to access it." Harry paused. Because the mother box is bonded to me because I have a connection to the source. He needs me specifically. Ron looked at him. He needs you. Alive and available, yeah, so he won't try to kill you. He'll try to take me, Harry said, which is arguably worse. Ron sat with this for a moment. The wind moved across the tower and the stars burned steadily overhead, and somewhere below in the castle someone was playing music, very faint, a slow melody from an enchanted instrument in a common room. I'm not going to pretend I understand most of what you can do now, Ron said. I watched you today and I could follow the fighting, but the way you were doing it, it wasn't like anything I've seen before. It wasn't like spells. It's both, Harry said. Spells and the source together. The magic gives the source shape and direction, and the source gives the magic power and scale. Right, Ron nodded slowly. I don't understand that, I'm being honest. You don't need to understand it, Harry said. You just need to know that I know what I'm doing and that I need you, both of you. He looked at Ron. The things you can do that I can't, being in two places, knowing people, reading situations, that's not nothing, Ron, that's actually what keeps me sane. Ron was quiet for a moment, and Harry could see him working through something, that particular internal Ron process of accepting something large without needing it to be larger than it was. Okay, Ron said simply, we're in, obviously, he paused. Hermione worked that out before I did, but I got there. Harry felt the warmth of that, the simple human warmth of loyalty which the source could not replicate and the mother box could not substitute for, and which was, he thought, probably the most important thing he had. She's drawing up a research plan, he said. I know. Ron looked pained but fond. She started it in the Three Broomsticks before Calabac showed up. She was quite annoyed that the parademons interrupted her. Harry laughed. It came out real and sudden, and the sound of it surprised him a little, and Ron grinned. And for a minute they were just two 15-year-old boys on a cold tower laughing because the alternative was too heavy to hold continuously. Below them Hogwarts breathed, the wards held, the stars turned overhead. And somewhere impossibly far and intimately close in the way that things with cosmic reach were close, Darkseid received Calabac's report, and the grey eyes read the data on the boy in Scotland, and something in the absolute stillness of that enormous face did not quite smile but moved in the direction of interest. The anti-life equation was close, closer than it had been in decades. The boy was extraordinary, that was noted. But extraordinary was not invincible, and Darkseid had all the time in every universe. He turned from Calabac's report and looked at something that hung in the air before him like a diagram, complex and complete, a map of the next moves in a game that had been running since the old gods died. He made a small adjustment, and in Scotland, in a castle that had stood for 1,000 years, the mother box went briefly, sharply cold in Harry Potter's hands. Harry looked down at it. I know, he said quietly. I know. The circuitry ran fast, patterns new and urgent, and the warmth came back, not the comfort warmth of bonding, but the bright warmth of something readying itself, a blade being sharpened, a fire being fed. Harry closed his hands around it, felt the source move through him like a tide. When you're ready, he said, as he'd said before, to the box, to Darkseid, to all of it. When you're ready. The stars burned on. Chapter 5, What Gods Fear. The source wall existed at the edge of everything. Not metaphorically, physically, actually, in the cosmological sense that made the word physical do more work than it was designed for. It was the boundary condition of the universe, the place where existence stopped being existence and became something for which no language had been built, because nothing with language had ever returned from it. Beings who reached it and tried to pass through became part of it. Literally. Their forms absorbed into the stone-like substance of the wall itself, preserved and conscious and utterly, permanently fixed. The wall was covered in them, the faces and shapes of every being across every universe who had sought to know what was beyond finality. Becca had been to the wall once before, decades ago, with someone she didn't name. She described it standing in the Hogwarts library with Harry and Hermione and Ron, her voice doing its controlled thing with the particular emotional content of old grief. And she said, "It does not feel like a wall. It feels like a mirror. You look at it and you see yourself without any of the comfortable stories." Harry had been thinking about it since October. Now it was November and they were going. The decision hadn't been made lightly. It had been made after 3 weeks of Hermione's research, which had produced a document of frankly alarming density that Harry had read twice and Ron had read in summary form, and after a long, difficult conversation with Becca about what being at the source wall could show Harry about the anti-life equation and what could be done about it. The shape of the problem was this. Darkseid needed Harry's connection to the source to read the final component of the anti-life proof from the wall itself. The connection ran both ways, which meant that Harry, if he could get to the wall and look directly at the relevant section, could potentially see the same thing Darkseid was trying to access, and understand it well enough to do something Darkseid hadn't anticipated. Not take the equation, but deny it. Structurally rewrite the section of the wall that contained it, using his dual nature, wizard and new god simultaneously, to lock the information in a format that only his specific combination of source access and structured magical intent could read. Effectively, put a lock on the equation that only Harry could open and then never open it. Darkseid would lose access permanently. The anti-life equation would become, cosmologically speaking, Harry's to guard. You'd be carrying it, Hermione had said when they worked this out, with the tone of someone who had arrived at an answer they were not sure they liked. Not holding it captive somewhere, carrying it, in you. I already carry a piece of a dark wizard's soul, Harry had said. I have a fairly high tolerance for uncomfortable cargo. She'd looked at him for a long time after that. Then she'd gone back to her research, with the focused ferocity of someone who intended to make sure every variable was accounted for. The boom tube opened at 3 in the morning in the room of requirement, which had configured itself for the occasion into something high-ceilinged and austere, and Harry stepped through with Becca and felt the universe change gears under him. Travel by boom tube was nothing like apparition. Apparition was a compression, the space between here and there briefly made irrelevant, an uncomfortable press of distance refusing to be distance. Boom tube travel was the opposite. An expansion, the route between 2 points made explicit and traversable, reality folding around you in a way that let you see, briefly, the structure of everything. Harry had done it twice now, and he still found it arresting, that 3-second window of seeing the bones of existence, the source running through everything like light through water. They came out on the boundary. It was not what he'd expected. He'd built a picture from Becca's descriptions and the mother box's information and his own imagination, and all of it was wrong in the specific way that reality was always wrong when you'd only read about it. The source wall stretched in both directions infinitely. That was the first thing. He'd understood infinite as a concept, and now he understood it as an experience, and those were two completely different things. It went left and right and up and down without interruption, without end, a surface of something that was not stone but behaved like stone, pale and enormous and present in a way that made the fabric of space seem thin by comparison. And it was covered in faces. That was the second thing. He'd known this, but knowing it and standing in front of it were different. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, maybe more, he couldn't count them, couldn't see the full extent of the wall, beings of every shape and form. Their features impermanent expressions of something that wasn't quite peace and wasn't quite anguish, but was the specific look of radical, final understanding. Some of them he might have recognized if he knew the history, most he didn't. All of them had come here seeking the thing that was beyond everything and had found that the seeking was the ending. He was aware, standing in front of it, of a strong instinct to simply reach out and touch it. Don't, Becca said without looking at him, which suggested this instinct was well documented. I know, he said, the vacuum of space should have been killing him. It wasn't, the source sustained him, the mother box throwing up something that was less a shield than a correction of local conditions. And he breathed in the sourceless void the way he breathed in air. Another thing he was still getting used to. Where? He said, Becca pointed. Not a specific location, a region of the wall, perhaps a quarter-mile to their right that looked no different from the rest of it to his eyes, but the mother box knew it. The moment his attention went that direction, the circuitry ran in a pattern he'd never seen before, frantic but precise, a pattern that looked like here, this is it, this is the thing. They moved along the wall's surface without touching it, Becca covering the distance with the ease of someone who had traveled without gravity for centuries, Harry matching her pace through source-assisted movement, and as they got closer he began to see what his eyes couldn't have distinguished from a distance. A section of the wall that was different. Not visibly, the surface looked the same, but in the frequency of it, the specific vibration that the source ran at in that section, lower and more complex than the surrounding areas, carrying information rather than just being structure. He stopped in front of it. The equation is in there, Becca said, in the wall. Encoded in the source frequency at this location. Darkseid has known about it for decades, but he cannot read it without a direct bonded connection to the source, a living connection, not a device. She looked at Harry. Until that connection didn't exist outside New Genesis, and New Genesis would never help him. Harry looked at the wall section. Through the mother box, he could feel the information in it, not read it, not yet, but feel its shape. Something complete and devastating and perfectly logical, a proof that ended in a conclusion no living being should have to carry. Can I read it without it affecting me? He said. Unknown. Becca's voice was honest. No one with your specific nature has done this before. Great. He looked at the wall for another moment. Then he took the mother box from his pocket and held it in both hands and reached into it, not extracting anything but completing the circuit, making himself fully available to the source connection, opening every channel the months of practice had built. The wall responded, not dramatically. A deepening of the vibration, a shift in the frequency of the relevant section, the information moving from something he could feel the shape of to something he could actually perceive. And it came into him not as words or numbers but as pure devastating understanding, the anti-life equation arriving in his consciousness the way a key arrived in a lock. He felt it land. It was the worst thing he had ever experienced. Not painful, worse than painful. It was the sudden absolute clarity of a proof that free will was mechanical, that love was chemical, that every choice anyone had ever made was the inevitable output of prior conditions, that the self was an illusion maintained by the inability to see all variables simultaneously. And then something pushed back. Not the mother box. Not Becca, him. From somewhere in the deepest part of what he was, the part that had died at 1 year old and come back, the part that carried both sides of the threshold, the part that the source had recognized as a bridge, something said no in a register that wasn't language. Not denial. Not refusal. Something more absolute than both. The simple, present fact of his own experience as evidence against the proof. Not an argument. Arguments could be countered. Evidence. The way he'd felt Sirius's hug in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, the way Ron's laugh had broken the tension on the astronomy tower, the way Hermione had touched the mother box and it had recognized her because she was someone Harry trusted, the way Neville had said my parents with his jaw set and his eyes direct. These were not mechanical outputs. These were not inevitable. They were chosen over and over in every moment by people who had every reason not to and chose to anyway. The equation tried to absorb him. He absorbed it instead. It took he didn't know how long, standing in front of the wall in the void beyond the universe. Long enough that Becca put her hand on his shoulder, steady and grounding. Long enough that the mother box ran so hot he could feel it through his palms. Long enough that what arrived as devastating became integrated, locked, sealed behind the specific combination of his nature that nothing else in existence could replicate. When he came back to himself, the wall in front of him had changed. The section that had carried the equation was still there, but its frequency was different, closed, private, accessible only to the specific source resonance of a soul that had crossed death and returned and chosen every day afterward to be human anyway. Harry, Becca's voice. He turned to look at her and her gold eyes were doing something he hadn't seen them do before, something careful and enormous, carefully contained. Did you? It's mine now, he said. His voice came out steady. He can't get to it. Not without me, and I won't let him use me. She looked at him for a long moment in the silence of the void. You are extraordinary, she said. Not with warmth exactly, that wasn't Becca's register, but with the specific quality of recognition she gave to things that earned it. She was right to hide the box where you would find it. Harry looked back at the wall. At the face nearest the change section, a being whose features he didn't know, preserved for centuries with the expression of radical, final understanding. He wondered what they'd been seeking, whether they'd found it. Let's go back, he said. There's something happening at Hogwarts. Becca didn't ask how he knew. She opened the boom tube. He knew because the mother box had been signaling for the last 10 minutes of his engagement with the wall, a frequency he recognized as Hermione combined with something he recognized as wrong. And by the time he stepped back into the room of requirement at 4:20 in the morning, it was past wrong and into crisis. Hermione was there with Ron. Ron had a cut across his forearm and Hermione's robes were scorched at the hem, and they both looked at Harry when he came through the boom tube with the expression of people who had been waiting for him with news. Voldemort made his move, Ron said. Where? Harry said. He's not here, Hermione said quickly. He sent people, Death Eaters. They came through the ministry. She stopped, took a breath, reorganized. There's something in the Department of Mysteries, he's after it. Sirius, someone showed Harry a vision of Sirius being tortured there. I didn't see a vision, Harry said. Both of them looked at him. I cut the connection in July, Harry said. He can't put visions into my head anymore. Something cold moved through him, which means the vision isn't from Voldemort. Then who? Hermione started. Harry was already moving. It's a decoy, he's not at the ministry. Then where is he? Ron said. Harry felt the mother box go sharp against his chest. Not the anti-life frequency, not Darkseid's probing, but something new, something that was the cosmological equivalent of a collision alarm, two threats intersecting in a way that should not have been possible. He's here, Harry said. He's at Hogwarts. The castle was not alarmed. Not yet. Voldemort was good at what he did, and what he did was move through protections the way water moved through cracks, finding the weakness in every structure. The wards that kept Hogwarts safe from muggles and conventional magical intrusion were not designed for a wizard with 60 years of dark experience and a snake's ability to sense gaps. Harry hit the corridor at a run and felt through the mother box for the specific frequency of Voldemort's magic. He'd touched it in the graveyard in the vision probes, enough contact that he had a signature for it, the way you could recognize a voice you'd heard before, and found it in the castle's lower levels. The dungeons, moving toward something, moving toward Becca. Harry stopped running. He stood in the corridor and understood, in the rapid way he understood things now, what was happening. Voldemort hadn't come for him, Voldemort had come for information. 2 months of failed probes and a demolished Hogsmeade had told him that Harry was beyond him now, which was a thing Tom Riddle could accept tactically even if it destroyed him personally. But information was different. If Voldemort could capture and interrogate a new god warrior, something from outside the known world, something with knowledge of the cosmic forces that were apparently surrounding his most hated enemy, he could recalibrate. Becca was alone in the East Wing, where she'd set up what she called a war room, and what was actually a repurposed storage room full of new Genesis military intelligence and the ongoing tactical assessment of Darkseid's likely next moves. She was armed and she was dangerous, and she was not in danger from Voldemort the way a human would be. But she didn't know Tom Riddle. She didn't know how he thought. She'd never fought a dark wizard, and dark wizards were different from new god warriors. They were subtle and personal, and they fought minds rather than bodies, and Becca's mind, for all its centuries of experience, had not been trained against legilimency. Harry moved. He came through the storage room door, and the situation was exactly what he'd feared and not what he'd projected, which was a distinction that mattered. Becca was standing with her sword drawn and 2 Death Eaters on the floor. They'd learned not to approach her directly, apparently, but Voldemort himself was at the far end of the room, and his wand was pointed not at Becca, but at the map she'd had spread on the table, and his eyes were moving over it with the speed and intelligence of a mind that could absorb and process at a rate that most people underestimated. He looked up when Harry came in. They looked at each other. Harry had thought in various idle moments about what this would feel like, the first real encounter since the graveyard, the first meeting after everything that had changed. He'd expected something, heat or cold or the old sick fear or the new certainty. What he actually felt was remarkably simple. He looked at Tom Riddle, at those flat red eyes and that white face and the ruin of what had once been a person, and he felt something that was close to pity, the kind that didn't compromise anything. Harry, Voldemort said, and the name in his mouth was old habit, old power, the word he'd used to define himself against for 30 years. Tom, Harry said. The red eyes moved over him, cataloging, assessing, running the rapid, intelligent inventory that Voldemort always ran, looking for weakness, looking for the gap in the altered thing that used to be a manageable enemy. You've changed, Voldemort said. You look the same, Harry said. That must be frustrating. A silence. Voldemort's face did something complicated. The near-inhuman features were harder to read than a normal face, but Harry had been studying them since he was 11, and he caught the specific compression around the mouth that was anger managed for tactical purposes. What you carry, Voldemort said. The box, the power. His head tilted slightly. I admit I miscalculated you. I have thought about little else for 2 months. The admission cost him something, Harry could see that, and yet he made it because Tom Riddle was always more dangerous when he was being honest. I am prepared to concede that our conflict as it has stood is moot. Harry looked at him. Not surrender, Voldemort said quickly, and the speed of it was interesting, the need to clarify, to not be misread in a specific direction. An observation. You have become something I did not account for. The war between us, he paused. There is a larger game, Potter, you know this. Yes, Harry said, I know it. Then you know that 2 entities fighting over the same territory when a third threatens that territory from outside is… Don't, Harry said. Don't. Voldemort stopped. You're going to offer an alliance, Harry said. Against Darkseid, the lesser evil argument. We have a common enemy, so perhaps we have common interest. He looked at Voldemort steadily. The answer is number you haven't heard. I don't need to hear it. Harry took a step forward, and Becca moved slightly beside him, not drawing her sword but present, a weight at his shoulder. Because your common enemy argument has a hole in it. Darkseid wants to end free will for every being in every universe. You want to end free will for every non-pureblood wizard in this country. The scale is different, the principle isn't. He kept his eyes on Voldemort. You're not the lesser evil, Tom, you're the same evil at a different resolution. The red eyes were very still. I'll give you 2 choices, Harry said. You can leave, walk out of this castle, take your Death Eaters with you, and we don't do this tonight, or I can end this right now. He said it without drama, without threat in the theatrical sense, just as information laid out clearly the way you told someone the time. I'm not afraid of either outcome. The room was very quiet. The 2 Death Eaters on the floor were not moving. Becca was watching Voldemort with the specific attention of someone who had fought beings far older and stronger and was adjusting her threat assessment continuously. Voldemort looked at Harry for a long time. The intelligence in those eyes was working, running the calculation, what he'd seen tonight, what Caliban's defeat in Hogsmeade had meant, what the source light in Harry's hands meant, the gap between what Harry had been and what he was now, measured against what was possible and what was survivable. Tom Riddle had survived because he was very good at knowing when a fight could not be won. "You were never what I thought you were," he said. And the tone of it was not admiration, not respect, but the specific quality of a person encountering a fact they hadn't wanted to be true and accepting it because the alternative was worse. "No," Harry said, "I wasn't." Voldemort lowered his wand. He looked at the map on the table, Becca's tactical map, new god intelligence, cosmic scale, and something moved in his face that was not readable but was real. He was seeing, perhaps for the first time with full clarity, the dimensions of the world he'd been trying to conquer without understanding that conquering it was cosmologically irrelevant. He turned and walked out. His Death Eaters followed. Harry didn't stop them. Becca looked at the door where they'd gone. "You let him leave," she said. "He'll fight Darkseid's forces on instinct when they come," Harry said. "He can't help it, it's his territory, and every Death Eater who engages a parademon is a parademon I don't have to deal with." He looked at the map on the table, at Becca's careful tactical notations. "He's not my war, Becca, he never really was." She looked at him, then at the door, then back. "Your war," she said, "is about to get considerably more complicated. Tell me." She moved to the map and pointed to something she'd marked 3 days ago before they'd left for the source wall, a location in the North Sea, nothing above water, but below it a reading she'd picked up on new Genesis equipment that she'd been trying to triangleize for a week. "A boom tube aperture," she said. "Permanent, or near permanent. Not the kind I use for transit, a structural one engineered into the sea floor. Someone placed it there very recently. It is large enough to bring through things considerably more serious than parademons or Caliban." "How recently?" Harry said. 14 days, she said, "while we were dealing with the Hogsmeade attack." Harry looked at the mark on the map. 14 days, while Caliban was providing a very good reason to look in one direction. "Darkseid used Caliban as a distraction," he said. "Yes. How long before the aperture can be used?" "My best estimate is 3 to 4 days." She met his eyes. "He is sending something through that aperture, Harry, not a scouting party, not Caliban again." She paused, and Becca was not a person who paused for effect. She paused because what she was about to say was genuinely difficult. "He is sending a Doomsday Protocol force. Specialized, designed for one specific acquisition objective." "Me," Harry said. "You," she confirmed. He looked at the map for a long moment, at the X in the North Sea and the lines of Becca's assessment radiating from it, at the tactical picture of a being with millennia of patience who had decided the time for patience was over. "Dumbledore needs to know," he said. "Yes," she said. "But Harry," she stopped again. He looked at her. In the months he'd known her, she had become, she was Becca, which meant she was not warm in the usual way, but she was present in a way that had its own kind of warmth, the warmth of someone who showed up reliably and told you the truth and stood at your shoulder without being asked. He'd come to value that more than he had words for. "Say it," he said. "Dumbledore has been managing information about you," she said. "Selectively, with care and with what he believes is good intention, but there are things he knows about your nature, about why the killing curse failed, about the Horcrux. Yes, I know, the mother box told me the night I arrived," she read his expression. "That he has not told you, that he has been preserving the possibility of using." Harry went very still. "Using how?" he said quietly. "I don't know the specifics. But in my experience," the gold eyes were direct, as they always were, with the particular honesty of someone who had watched human beings manage one another with good intentions for a very long time. "People who keep information about you from you for your own good tend to have a plan for you that you would not agree to if you were informed." Harry looked at the map, at the X in the North Sea, at the days counting down. "I'll talk to him tonight," he said. "He will not tell you willingly." "I know." Harry picked up the mother box from the table and held it for a moment, feeling it settle into his hands, feeling the warm, familiar hum of it. "But I'm not asking any more." Dumbledore was in his office. He was always in his office at this hour, Harry had learned, working by wandlight with Fawkes sleeping on his perch and the portraits of previous headmasters snoring with varying degrees of enthusiasm. He looked up when Harry came in without knocking, and something in his expression, not surprise, not quite, but something in the same family, told Harry that he'd been expecting this conversation. Maybe not tonight, maybe not quite like this. Harry sat down across from him and said without preamble, "Tell me about the Horcrux." Dumbledore set down his quill. The silence lasted perhaps 4 seconds, which in a silence of this kind was a very long time. "How long have you known?" Dumbledore said softly. "Becca deduced it in October," Harry said. "The mother box confirmed it. There's a fragment of Voldemort's soul in my scar." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "And you've known this for some time, and you've been, what, waiting for the right moment, building toward the right circumstances, planning how to have the conversation." Dumbledore looked at him, and the look in his eyes was real, not performed. The particular grief of someone who had been carrying a weight they knew they would eventually have to hand to someone else, and had dreaded the moment. "Harry," he said. "Don't," Harry said, not angry, not loud. "Don't soften it. Tell me," a pause, then quietly and with precision. "When Voldemort's curse struck you as an infant, his soul fragmented. A piece of it attached to you, to your scar. You have been in the technical sense a Horcrux for 14 years. He held Harry's gaze. "And for the other Horcruxes to be destroyed, for Voldemort to be made mortal, the piece in you would need to be destroyed," Harry said. "Yes." The office was very quiet. Fawkes opened one eye, looked at Harry, and closed it again. "You thought I would need to die," Harry said. "That was the plan you were building toward. At some point, under some specific circumstances, you were going to tell me that to end Voldemort I would need to sacrifice myself." Dumbledore said nothing, which was its own answer. Harry sat with this for a moment. He turned it over, looked at it from the different angles, felt the edges of it. The full shape of what Dumbledore had been doing, not unkindly, not without love, but doing over years of careful preparation and managed information and kept secrets. "The Horcrux is not going to be a problem," Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. "Harry, the fragment of Voldemort's soul that attached to me specifically because I carry something of death in me already," Harry said. "I've known that since July. The mother box told me. It attached to the death resonance, the part of me that died and came back." He looked at Dumbledore. "The source can disaggregate it, separate it from what's mine without destroying me. It's a precision operation. I've been working on it for 2 months with Becca. It's not the problem you thought it was." Dumbledore was looking at him with an expression that was, for the first time in Harry's experience of him, genuinely undefended. Not performing wisdom, not performing calm. Just a man who had built an entire architecture of protection and sacrifice around a person and was discovering that the person had quietly built a different structure. "You weren't going to tell me," Harry said, "and it wasn't an accusation, just a fact. You were going to wait until it was necessary." "I didn't know," Dumbledore started. "You didn't know what I'd become," Harry said. "Fair, neither did I," he stood up. "I'm not angry with you, I want you to know that. I understand why you made the choices you made, but we're not doing it this way anymore." He looked down at the old man in the chair, this brilliant, careful, lonely man who had loved imperfectly for a very long time. "We're telling each other things, actually telling. No managed revelations, no right moments, no protecting me from information by deciding what I can handle." He paused. "Do you understand?" Dumbledore looked at him for a long time, and then, and this was the thing, this was the moment Harry would remember, he said, "Yes, I understand. Not with defeat, with something that was actually closer to relief. The relief of someone who had been carrying something alone for a long time and had been offered, finally, the possibility of putting it down. There's a boom tube aperture in the North Sea," Harry said. "Permanent installation. Darkseid is sending something through in 3 to 4 days. It's the real attack. Hogsmeade was the distraction." He paused. "We need to plan." Dumbledore rose. The portraits were waking up around the walls, catching the tenor of the room, leaning forward in their frames with the alert interest of witnesses who understood they were watching something historical. "Tell me everything," Dumbledore said. Harry almost smiled. Those words from this man in this office, the echo of October, reversed. "That," he said, "is exactly what I was going to do." Chapter 6, The First New God Wizard. 3 days later, the North Sea answered. Harry felt the aperture open from 40 miles away. Felt it through the mother box the way you felt a door open in a pressurized room. The sudden equalization of something that had been building toward release. He was standing on the astronomy tower when it happened, watching the northeast horizon with Becca beside him, and the sky in that direction did something that wasn't visible to normal human eyes but was absolutely visible to his. A deep red pulse, far away and spreading, the specific electromagnetic signature of a permanent boom tube discharging its first payload. "How many?" he said. Becca was already reading her equipment, new Genesis instrumentation that looked nothing like anything wizarding and operated on principles that would have made Hermione's research notes look like a shopping list. Her expression was doing the controlled recalibration thing. "Significant," she said. "How significant?" 30 parademons in the advance wave. She paused, which with Becca meant the next part was the part that mattered. "And a hunger dog pack, 8 units. Harry had read about hunger dogs in Becca's intelligence files. Elite apocalyptian shock troops, individually stronger than Calibac's standard forces, operating in coordinated packs with a tactical intelligence that made parademons look like thrown rocks. They had never lost a hunger dog engagement in the 18 months since Darkseid had deployed them. "And," he said, because her pause had a third element in it. "Steppenwolf," she said. He knew that name too, Darkseid's uncle, Field General. The being who had fought the first war against New Genesis personally, and come closer than anyone to winning it. Not a blunt instrument like Calabac, a tactician, a commander, someone who read battles the way Hermione read texts with total absorption and instant recall. Darkseid is sending his best, Harry said. Darkseid is ending the patience phase, Becca said. This is the acquisition push. He wants you before you become any more difficult to acquire. She looked at him. He is correct that the window is closing. In another year, your integration with the source will be deep enough that extraction would be impossible even with the anti-life framework. So he's moving now, Harry said, before I'm fully what I'm becoming. Yes. Harry looked at the northeast horizon. 40 miles of North Sea between the aperture and the Scottish coast. At Paradum flight speed with a hunger dog forced march, he calculated it, running the numbers through the mother box's tactical layer. They'd reach the mainland in under 2 hours, reach Hogwarts in 3. He had less time than that because he wasn't going to wait for them to come to Hogwarts. Get everyone, he said. Becca, I know. She was already moving. The room of requirement had never been configured like this before. It had been a training space, a hiding space, a war room, and once memorably, a place that had produced exactly 47 sandwiches when Ron had asked it for a snack with genuine emotional intensity. Now it was a command center, because Harry had asked it to be, and the castle had understood him in the way it had been understanding him since September. The deep old magic of Hogwarts resonating with the source frequency in him like a tuning fork to a bell. Maps on 3 walls, Becca's tactical intelligence, Hermione's research-derived cosmological charts, and one of Harry's own making that combined both and added the specific magical geography of Scotland, the ley lines and old wards, and the particular shape of Hogwarts's protective field, which Harry could now see as clearly as the walls themselves. Dumbledore was there, and McGonagall, and Lupin, who had come from somewhere in the last 12 hours. Harry hadn't asked how. Sirius's network had its own efficiency. And Kingsley, who turned out to be exactly the kind of person you wanted in a room when things were serious. And Ron and Hermione and Neville standing together near the central table with expressions that said they understood what was happening and had made their decision about it. Harry stood at the head of the table. The mother box sat in front of him, circuitry at full complexity, every pattern running simultaneously. The force coming out of the aperture is heading here, he said. 30 Paradumans, 8 hunger dogs, and Steppenwolf commanding. They'll reach the Scottish coast in 90 minutes and Hogwarts in 3 hours at their current pace. He looked around the room. We're not letting them reach Hogwarts. The students, McGonagall started, will be in the castle with every ward active and every protection doubled, Harry said. I've already spoken to the castle. McGonagall looked at him at this, and the expression on her face did something that was not quite surprise because McGonagall was too controlled for surprise but was in the same general neighborhood. It understands the situation. The wards will hold against anything short of Steppenwolf himself, and Steppenwolf won't reach the wards. He paused. I'm taking the fight to them on the coast, Harry, Dumbledore said, and the tone was the careful one, the managed one, the one that had been trained over decades to introduce measured concern in a way that felt like wisdom. Harry looked at him. Dumbledore closed his mouth, opened it again, said something different from what he'd been going to say. What do you need from us? And this was the thing, this was the changed thing, the evidence of the conversation 3 nights ago having actually mattered, and Harry felt it as real and was grateful for it. Kingsley, I need you to manage the Auror office, Harry said. Not to fight this, they're not equipped for new god forces, but to keep the Ministry from doing something unhelpful while it's happening. Umbridge will try to use this as an opportunity, make sure she can't. Kingsley nodded, already pulling out his communication mirror. Professor Dumbledore, I need the order to form a secondary perimeter around Hogwarts, not to engage, to evacuate any students who somehow end up outside the castle's protection. Just evacuation. Dumbledore nodded. Professor McGonagall, the students, she said. Yes, already happening. She was out the door before he finished saying her name. Harry looked at Lupin. Remus. I need you to tell me anything you know about the Scottish coast northeast of here. Terrain, magical significance, anything old. Lupin straightened, the particular light in his eyes when someone treated him like the resource he was. There's a coastal cliff formation about 12 miles northeast near Cove Bay, old magic in the rock, pre-Hogwarts, possibly pre-Roman, the kind of residual power that hasn't been formally accessed in centuries. He paused. Why? Because the mother box can interface with old magic if it's source adjacent, Harry said. And residual power that's been building in rock for 2,000 years is a very large battery if you know how to connect it. Lupin stared at him, then softly. James would have absolutely no idea what to do with you. Sirius said the same thing. Harry said, I take it as a compliment. He turned to Ron, Hermione, and Neville last. They were standing together and they all 3 had the look. He knew that look, had worn it himself in various versions, the look of people who had decided on a thing and were simply waiting for the conversation to catch up to the decision. No, he said. Harry, Hermione started. You're not coming to the coast. We're DA, Neville said. You trained us. I trained you for Death Eaters, Harry said. This is Steppenwolf and 30 parademons. The gap between those two things is not bridgeable by training time. And if something gets past you, Ron said, steady, direct, no theater in it, just the honest question. If something comes through and reaches the castle, Harry looked at him. Then you're here, Harry said. You three in the castle protecting the students, that's not a lesser assignment, that's the actual point of all of it. He looked at each of them in turn. If I fail at the coast, you three are the last line, I need to know it's you. A silence. Ron exhaled slowly. That's very neatly done, he said. I mean it, Ron. I know you mean it, Ron said. That's why it's neatly done. He looked at Neville, who looked at Hermione, who was doing the thing with her jaw that meant she was accepting something she'd rather argue but couldn't find the logical flaw in. We'll be here, she said. She held Harry's gaze for a moment and something moved in it, not goodbye. She would never do goodbye before a thing happened. It was too pessimistic for Hermione, but something that was the full weight of 5 years of friendship and what that meant and what she needed him to know without saying it. He understood. He always did. Good, he said. He looked at Becca. Ready? I've been ready since October, she said. Harry picked up the mother box. The circuitry ran bright, every pattern alive, and the warmth of it moved through his hands and up his arms and settled in his chest alongside something that was not quite the source and not quite him, but both, the integrated thing he'd been becoming since July, finally and fully present. He opened a boom tube, his own. The first one he'd opened independently, without the mother box generating the spatial fold itself, but through him, with the box as amplifier and his own source connection as the engine. It was bigger than Becca's. It was golden where hers was golden, but with something else running in it. A thread of old light that was the specific signature of structured magical intent riding a source wave. And when he stepped through it, he felt the castle notice him leaving, feel the wards extend a fraction as though reaching after him. And he put his hand to the stone of the doorframe as he passed through and said quietly to the castle itself, to the 1,000 years of it, the deep accumulated magic of it, I'm coming back. The stone was warm under his palm, then the boom tube took him. The Scottish coast at 4 in the morning was cold and dark and beautiful in the way that things were beautiful when they didn't know anyone was watching. The cliff formation Lupin had described was exactly what he'd said, ancient rock, the kind of geological patience that made human history seem brief, and he could feel the old magic in it the moment he arrived, deep and slow and enormously patient, source adjacent in the way that very old things sometimes were, having absorbed enough human belief and ambient magic over millennia to carry a charge that had never been formally accessed. He connected to it through the mother box in the first 5 minutes, establishing the interface while Becca set up her position on the high ridge and the sea moved below them, dark and relentless, and the northeast sky was doing something wrong. The red pulse of the aperture was visible from here, 40 miles out, a smear of wrong light on the horizon that was getting more distinct as what had come through it got closer. Signal strength on the old magic is substantial, Harry said, his hands flat on the cliff face, the mother box pressed to the rock beside them. More than I expected. The Picts built here, Becca said, before the Celts, before the Romans. They understood the land as a living system. She was checking her equipment, her sword, the energy weapon at her hip that Harry had seen her use exactly once, and which had left a crater in the Hogwarts East courtyard that they'd had to explain to Flitwick. They gave the rock their attention for long enough that the rock kept it. Harry straightened. The interface was established. The cliff stored energy available to him like a vast reservoir sitting just behind the ordinary limits of what he could pull on alone. He tested it, drew a thread of it through the mother box's amplification and felt it arrive, deep and earthy and completely different in texture from the source's pure amplitude, like the difference between a river and a sea. I can work with this, he said. The horizon told him he had approximately 12 minutes. He spent 6 of them in stillness. Not passive stillness, active, the kind that built. He'd learned this from Becca, who'd learned it from new Genesis training that went back further than the current universe. The practice of arriving fully present to a fight before the fight arrived. He stood on the cliff edge in the dark and let everything settle and integrate and become available. The mother box, the source, the cliff stored magic, his own trained wizarding power, the specific combination of all of it that made him the thing he was, and he looked at the approaching force with the same quality of attention that Voldemort had accused him of having that night in Dumbledore's office. Clear, direct, unafraid, 30 parademons, 8 hunger dogs, Steppenwolf. The air above the water began to move wrong. The first parademons crested the horizon, visible against the slightly lighter dark of the sky, coming low over the waves in formation. Harry raised his wand in his right hand, held the mother box in his left, felt the cliff energy waiting behind him like a drawn breath. Harry, Becca said from the ridge. I know, he said, I see them. Number Steppenwolf, she paused. He's fast, faster than Calabac. He'll come directly for you and he'll come immediately. He won't wait for the parademons to engage first. That's his tactic. Direct pressure on the primary objective while the lesser forces create surrounding chaos. Noted, Harry said. Don't let him get inside your reach. His weapon, the electroaxe, yes. Harry had read the file 3 times. I know. Reading about it is not. Becca, he glanced back at her just briefly and smiled. I've got it. She looked at him for a moment, then she checked her sword grip and looked at the horizon. Don't get killed, she said. The tactical situation becomes significantly worse if you get killed. Deeply motivating, he said. The parademons hit the coast. He moved into them like weather moving into weather. Not waiting, closing the distance himself, coming off the cliff's edge on a source thrust that took him 30 feet into the air and into the first formation before they'd fully processed his position. And the first burst he threw was wide, catching 4 parademons simultaneously with a horizontal arc of combined source and magic that was neither a spell nor a raw blast but something in between. A shaped wave with structural precision that hit each target at a specific frequency, the mother box had identified as their systemic vulnerability. 4 down in the first second. He was already moving, the source lifting him higher, angling through the second cluster, and he was using both simultaneously, wand in his right hand casting with a speed and precision that 4 months of DA practice had built to something remarkable, left hand directing source bursts through the mother box's amplification. The 2 streams of power working in the coordination they'd been finding since July. A parademon got close enough to touch him. He let the source flare outward from his skin, not a directed push but a radial repulsion, a field effect, reality disagreeing with the parademon's proximity, and it went backward 20 feet and hit the cliff face with enough force that it didn't come back up. The hunger dogs were different. They came low and fast and in a rotating pattern that was designed to be disorienting, never presenting a clear target, always approaching from angles that forced him to turn, to choose, to be always half-facing something behind him. He recognized the tactic immediately and respected it, genuinely, clinically respected it, the tactical intelligence of a formation designed by someone who understood that an overwhelmed mind made worse decisions. He stopped trying to track individuals. He reached instead for the cliff magic, drew it up through the mother box in a sustained pull, feeling the vast slow patience of 2,000 years of accumulated power moving through him, and he pushed it outward in a dome. Not offensive. Spatial. A field of altered physics centered on himself, extending 30 feet in every direction, in which the properties of momentum and direction were subtly but fundamentally different from what apocalyptic tactical doctrine expected. The hunger dogs hit it, and their rotation fell apart. Not because they were stopped, they pushed through the field, but because the calculated angles of their approach were wrong by enough that the coordinated pressure became uncoordinated, and uncoordinated was a problem he could work with. He worked with it 3 minutes. When he came out the other side of the hunger dog engagement, 6 of the 8 were down and the remaining 2 had retreated to regroup, and the parademons were reduced to 11 from 30. He was breathing hard, that was new. Or rather, it was a calibration, a real measurement of what this cost him, and he noted it and factored it in and was aware of the specific quality of effort that 3 minutes of this scale of fighting produced. Then Steppenwolf arrived. He came from above, which was not what Harry had been tracking, and he came without a boom tube. He had simply been present on the cliff above Harry's position, having arrived while Harry was dealing with the parademons, patient and watching, and now he dropped. He was not Calabac's size. That was the first recalibration. He was closer to human in scale, perhaps 6'4", which meant every inch of his power was density rather than volume, compressed and purposeful, and the electroaxe in his hands moved with the ease of something that was an extension of him rather than a weapon he carried. He hit the ground between Harry and the remaining forces and looked at him. The source bonded, he said. His voice was measured, educated, even not the blunt instrument of Calabac's speech but something precise, the voice of someone who had been in more battles than most civilizations had lasted. I have read the reports, Calabac's transmission, the Hogsmeade incident. He tilted his head. You are remarkable for your age. People keep saying that, Harry said. He was settling his footing, reading Steppenwolf's stance, letting the mother box run its analysis. The old magic from the cliff was still available. He could feel it behind him, patient and enormous. I'm choosing to take it as a compliment. It is an observation, Steppenwolf said. The remarkable rarely survive contact with me. I thought you should know that before we begin. Fair warning, Harry said. My turn, I'm going to give you one chance to go back through the aperture. Steppenwolf looked at him for a moment, and then he smiled, not Calabac's brutal pleasure but something more considered, the smile of someone who had seen everything twice and still found select moments interesting. No, he said. Okay, Harry said, and he let everything go simultaneously. It was not the kind of fight that had clear stages. Steppenwolf was the finest tactical combatant Harry had faced, which was different from being the strongest. Caliban had more raw strength. Darkseid had more raw power, but Steppenwolf had something neither of them had, perfect adaptive efficiency. He fought the way water found its way through stone, without ego, without investment in any particular approach, changing continuously, always finding the most effective path between current state and desired outcome. He read Harry's patterns in the first 40 seconds. Harry could see him doing it, the slight adjustments in stance and angle that told him Steppenwolf was cataloging, building a model of how Harry moved, what he favored, where his decision points were. So Harry changed. Not randomly, purposefully, structuring the change, using the wizard's training to create variations on spellwork that the source delivery made look like something else entirely, layering the two systems in ways that were specifically designed to resist pattern recognition. A confringo delivered through source amplitude looked nothing like a confringo. A wandless gravitational inversion had a different frequency signature from a structured magical field. He was mixing the languages deliberately, keeping Steppenwolf's model incomplete. The electroaxe was the real problem. It was a weapon built around disrupting energy fields, designed for new god combat, specifically for encounters where source-based power was the primary threat, and every time it connected with anything he was projecting, it sent a disruption back along the projection that was deeply unpleasant in a way that was hard to describe. Not painful exactly, but wrong. Like a chord played slightly sharp but directly in his nervous system. He took 3 partial hits before he understood the mechanism, and then he stopped projecting fields and started projecting objects. Physical. Actual physical matter, transfigured at source speed from the rock of the cliff face, shaped with wizarding precision, thrown with source force. Not energy that the axe could disrupt, mass that it had to physically contend with. Steppenwolf was very good at contending with mass, but nobody was infinitely good at everything. The exchange lasted 4 minutes. Becca was dealing with the remaining forces on the periphery. Harry could hear her sword and see the peripheral light of her energy weapon in his vision's edge. And the cliff's stored magic was flowing through him continuously, topping up what the fight was drawing down, the vast, slow, Pictish patience of it keeping him level in a way that pure source access alone wouldn't have managed. Then Steppenwolf changed his approach. He stopped engaging and stepped back and looked at Harry across 20 feet of contested ground and said, "The anti-life equation." Harry kept his guard up. "What about it?" "You went to the wall," Steppenwolf said. "The master knows." He felt the resonance change 3 days ago. "You sealed the equation inside yourself." The measured eyes were reading him. "You understand what this means. You carry the equation now. Even if you never use it, even if you destroy yourself rather than let the master access it, you have it inside you permanently." "Yes," Harry said. "You do not understand what that means," Steppenwolf said. "Fully not yet." The electroaxe was still in his hands, but he was not swinging it. "The equation is not passive. It will work on you over time. The proof of the illusion of free will carried by someone who chose to carry it. The contradiction won't," Harry said. Steppenwolf raised an eyebrow. "The equation is sealed," Harry said. "Not carried openly, sealed. Behind a lock that's specific to my nature. I can't be worked on by something I've put behind a closed door." He looked at Steppenwolf steadily. "I know you're trying to make me uncertain. I know that's the tactical play. If I'm uncertain, I'm less effective and you can close the distance. But I'm not uncertain about this." A pause. "I've been uncertain about a lot of things in my life, not this." Steppenwolf looked at him for a long time. The measured eyes, the centuries of battles won, the intelligence that was probably, Harry thought, genuinely worth respecting even in opposition. "The master underestimated you," Steppenwolf said finally. "Most people do," Harry said. "Shall we finish this?" Steppenwolf moved. Harry went up. Not retreating, reversing the geometry, because Steppenwolf was a ground and close-range tactician and his weapon's disruption field had a range of approximately 15 feet, so above 15 feet the electroaxe was less effective and Harry's source projection was unconstrained. Steppenwolf had expected him to stand and fight at ground level because that was what every opponent of Steppenwolf's had done. There was nowhere to go, the cliff at your back, the sea ahead. Except Harry had been flying on source thrust since October. He went 30 feet straight up and looked down at Steppenwolf on the cliff. And he pulled on the stored cliff magic, all of it this time, not a thread, not a sustained draw, but the full reserve, 2,000 years of accumulated power coming through him in a single channeled surge, and combined it with the source and his own structured intent, and cast something that didn't have a name and never would because no one had ever combined these 3 systems before at this scale. It wasn't a beam. It wasn't an explosion, it was a revision. A rewriting of the local physical conditions in a column from Harry's position down to Steppenwolf's. The properties of matter and energy in that column briefly and precisely altered to something that new god armor was not rated for, that no tactical doctrine on Apocalypse had protocols against, because no one on Apocalypse had ever faced a wizard riding the source carrying the amplified magic of pre-Roman Scotland. Steppenwolf went to one knee. His armor held. New god armor was excellent, and he was Darkseid's general, and the armor was not going to fail from one strike regardless of how unprecedented that strike was. But he went to one knee, and Harry came back down. He landed 10 feet away and looked at Steppenwolf kneeling in the cracked rock with the electro-axe driven into the ground as a brace, and he said, "I'm going to close the aperture. After I do, it won't be openable again from your side, not in this location." He let the source hold steady around him, still drawing on the cliff, still fully present. "You can stay and keep fighting, or you can go back through before it closes and tell Darkseid what I've done." Steppenwolf looked up at him, those measured eyes. "The Master will come himself," he said, "eventually." "I know," Harry said, "I'll be ready." "You are ready now," Steppenwolf said, and it was the most honest thing anyone on Darkseid's side had said to him. "That is the problem." He pulled the electro-axe from the rock and stood, not with defeat, with the grace of someone retreating on their own terms, which was a different thing. The Master did not account for a soul that carries death and chooses life. "No," Harry said, "he didn't." Steppenwolf looked at him for one more moment. Then he called his boom tube, the red-edged one, the apocalyptian architecture, and stepped through, and behind him the remaining parademons followed, and then the hunger dogs who were still functional, and the boom tube closed. And Harry turned to the northeast horizon, 40 miles out, where the permanent aperture pulsed red in the dark above the water. Becca was beside him when he faced the aperture. Her armor had a score across the left pauldron that hadn't been there 3 hours ago, and she was breathing in the controlled way she breathed when she was working harder than she showed. And when she looked at him and saw what he was about to do, she said, "You're sure you can close a permanent installation from here?" "No," Harry said. "But I know what a permanent installation is built from. It's source anchored, which means I can reach it. And I know how to revise the anchor." He held the mother box in both hands and felt it singing high and clear, the highest frequency he'd ever heard from it. "The cliff magic is mostly used. I'll need to do this on my own." She looked at him for a moment, "Then do it." He reached out, not physically source reach, the extended consciousness of a mind that had been practicing this kind of thing since July, feeling along the frequency of the open aperture to its anchor point on the sea floor. Found it. An elegant piece of engineering, actually. He noted the elegance while he was unwinding it, the way the best solutions always were, a source anchor tied to a permanent spatial distortion, self-sustaining, designed to be indefinitely stable. He rewrote the self-sustaining property first. Changed the anchor from self-sustaining to decay-dependent, which meant it needed continuous input to stay open. Then he cut the input. Precisely, cleanly, no drama. The red pulse on the horizon flickered. He reached deeper, found the distortion itself, the spatial fold that the aperture depended on, and applied the specific structured magical intent that was his and only his, the signature combination of source and wizarding magic that the past 6 months had built into something identifiable and individual. He sealed the fold with it, made the location itself resistant to reopening, made it his territory. The aperture closed. The horizon went dark. The North Sea moved quietly below them, indifferent and eternal, and the sky above the water was just sky again. No red pulse, no wrong light, just stars disappearing one by one into the first pale gray of pre-dawn. Harry exhaled. Becca said nothing for a moment, then, "That was well done." "Thanks." He was tired, actually tired in a way that went deeper than his muscles, the kind of tired that was the body's honest accounting of an unusual expenditure. "Darkseid will find another way in, different location." "Yes," she said, "but not quickly. The ceiling you put on that site will take his engineers months to analyze." She looked at the dark horizon. "You bought time." "That's what I was aiming for," he said. He looked at the cliff behind him, the old rock, quiet now, the magic in it genuinely depleted, like a battery that had given everything it had. "Thank you," he said to the rock quietly, which was perhaps a strange thing to say to a cliff but seemed like the right thing. Becca did not comment on it. He opened a boom tube home. The Great Hall at dawn looked different from the astronomy tower approach. Harry came through the boom tube in the courtyard, Becca stepping through behind him, and the castle was still locked and warded and full of sleeping students. And the morning light was beginning to do its thing with the windows, all that old glass, making the east face of Hogwarts look like something that had been built specifically to catch the first light of any given day. He stood in the courtyard for a moment. Just stood. The mother box hummed quietly in his hand. A low, satisfied note, the circuitry running its slow morning pattern. He was tired in the way that felt like honesty. His right arm was bruised from the one electro-axe partial hit he'd taken that had gotten through his guard, proper bruised, deep and aching, and the particular quality of that ordinary pain was almost a relief, the confirmation that he was still a person rather than just a phenomenon. Hermione found him in about 30 seconds, which suggested she'd been watching from a window. She crossed the courtyard at a pace that was technically walking, but had the structural honesty of someone who had not slept and had been very worried and had decided to be the person who found out first rather than waiting with the others. She stopped in front of him and looked at him, complete inventory, top to bottom, the bruise on his arm, the state of his robes, the look in his eyes, and then she said, "How bad?" "The bruise is the worst of it," he said. She looked at the bruise. Then she reached into her robes. She had potions in her robes. She always had potions in her robes at this point. It had become a permanent feature of Hermione Granger since approximately October, and produced a bruise reduction salve and handed it to him without comment. He took it. "The aperture," she said. "Closed, sealed." Steppenwolf went back. Parademons and hunger dogs dealt with. "Steppenwolf," she repeated, with the tone of someone confirming a detail in a report that was more alarming than expected. "Yeah, and you're standing here with a bruise." "Yeah." She looked at him for another long moment, and he could see her filing all of it away in the specific Hermione way, not just the information but the implications of the information, the second and third order effects, what this meant for what came next. He appreciated that about her enormously. She never just received the surface level. "He'll come himself," she said. "Darkseid." "Yes," Harry said, "eventually." "And when he does," Harry looked at Hogwarts. At the ancient, beautiful, impossible pile of it. The windows full of sleeping children, the towers against the pale morning sky, the lake going silver in the early light. "When he does," he said, "I'll be more ready than I am now. And I'm already fairly ready." Ron appeared in the doorway across the courtyard, took in the scene, Harry, Hermione, Becca, the general state of things, and walked over with his hands in his pockets and the expression of someone who had also not slept and was managing the fact that he hadn't been there by being here now. "Well," he said. "Closed the aperture," Harry said. "Sent Steppenwolf home, got a bruise." Ron looked at the bruise. "Wicked," he said, which coming from Ron was a comprehensive positive assessment. "How are the students?" Harry said. "Fine, scared, asking a lot of questions." Ron paused. "Neville led 3 first-years through a mindfulness breathing exercise at 2 in the morning. I think he scared them more than the parademons did." Harry felt the laugh come up from somewhere genuine and let it. It moved through him like something clean, and Ron grinned at the sound of it, and even Becca's mouth curved slightly in the early light. "Becca." He looked at her, the score across her armor, the gold eyes doing their quiet thing in the morning, the sword at her hip that she hadn't put away yet. She had been a warrior when his grandparents' grandparents were young. She had fought wars that made human history look like footnotes. She had lost someone she loved in a ruin of a Surrey church and searched for 11 years for what that person had died to protect. She was looking at Hogwarts the way she sometimes looked at things that had surprised her. "What?" he said. "This castle," she said. "It has a quality I don't often encounter." "What quality?" "Worth protecting," she said simply. Harry looked at it too. Felt the wards under his feet, the deep accumulated magic of the place, the way the stones held 1,000 years of human life and learning, and the specific alchemy of children becoming people. "Yeah," he said, "it does." Dumbledore found him in the headmaster's office an hour later. Harry had been expecting it. He was sitting in the chair across from the desk, not waiting, just there, looking at the portraits of the previous headmasters who were all awake and paying attention with the combined energy of people who had followed a story for several hours and wanted to know how the current chapter ended. Dumbledore sat down. He looked at Harry the way he'd been looking at him since October, with the quality of a man who was continuously revising a model that kept requiring revision. It should have been frustrating. For someone of Dumbledore's intelligence and pride, Harry thought, it probably was on some level. And yet the look itself was not frustrated. It was something else. "Steppenwolf," Dumbledore said. "Gone," Harry said. "Aperture closed. The students are safe. The students are safe." A pause. Outside, a bird was doing something ornate and complicated with the early morning. "I owe you an apology," Dumbledore said. "Several, actually. I've been cataloging them." The pale blue eyes were direct and undefended in the way they'd been 3 nights ago. "The Horcrux was the largest omission, but not the only one. There were things I knew about your parents, about the night Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow, that I have withheld because I decided the knowledge would be harmful at the wrong time." Harry looked at him steadily. "Tell me now." "Your mother's sacrifice created a protection that was not simply love," Dumbledore said. "I've always described it that way because love was the closest word available, but it was more specific. She chose to die without being asked, offered herself without provocation or exchange. And that specific choice, unconditional, unforced, of the self for another, created a frequency in the protective magic that was source adjacent. I believe your connection to the source was always partly hers, part of what she gave you." Harry was very still. "She was touching the same substrate," Dumbledore continued quietly. "In her last moments, that's why the curse rebounded. It met her frequency in you, and the source itself, the thing beneath everything, would not permit the destruction of that specific resonance. It was too complete, too fundamental. He paused. Your mother was not a new god. She was not trained in any cosmological tradition. She was a first-generation witch who loved her child. And somehow she touched the same energy that beings of immense power have sought for centuries and used it in the most ordinary possible way. Harry sat with this for a long time. He thought about Lily Potter in a way he rarely let himself think about her, not as a concept, not as a sacrifice, but as a person. A young woman in a small house in Godric's Hollow who had stood between her son and death and said not him with everything she had. The mother box pulsed in his pocket, soft, like recognition. She was extraordinary, Harry said, not with grief exactly, with something older and quieter. She just didn't know it. Most extraordinary people don't, Dumbledore said. He looked at Harry for a moment. You are like her in that respect, though I suspect you're beginning to understand it. Harry looked at the desk between them, at the familiar shape of this room that had been the scene of so many things, conversations and confessions, and the careful management of a boy who had never quite fit the plan made for him. He thought about who he'd been in June, not worse, not lesser, just incomplete. And who he was now, sitting in the same chair with the mother box warm in his pocket and the source steady underneath him, and two of the best people he knew waiting downstairs. We're going to face Darkseid, he said. Not today, maybe not this year, but he'll come and it'll be real, and when it happens I want you with me. He looked at Dumbledore. Actually with me. Not managing it from behind, not protecting me from information, with me. Dumbledore nodded. Yes, he said, with you. And Voldemort's Horcruxes, Harry said, we find them, destroy them, properly, not as part of a plan where I'm the last one. Becca and I can handle the one in my scar safely, the others we find together. Together, Dumbledore said. Right, Harry stood. He stretched, felt the bruise protest, felt the tiredness of the night in his bones alongside something else. Something that was underneath the tiredness, deeper and steadier. The quality of a person who had done the thing they were made to do and found it fit them well. I'm going to sleep for about 12 hours, and then we're going to start planning. Of course, Dumbledore said. Harry was almost at the door when Dumbledore said quietly, Harry, he turned. I am proud of you, Dumbledore said, not with the particular quality that had always preceded a managed revelation or a carefully positioned encouragement, just clearly as a fact, the way Harry had been stating facts all morning. I should have said so before, without the other things in front of it. Harry looked at him for a moment. I know, he said, thank you. He went down the stairs. The Great Hall was starting to fill with students coming down for breakfast. The ordinary Hogwarts morning reinstating itself with the cheerful indifference to drama that was one of the best things about a large group of teenagers who had been awake too long and were now primarily motivated by food. The smell of bacon and toast moved through the corridors like a promise kept. Harry came down the last staircase and found Ron and Hermione waiting at the bottom of it, which he'd known they would be, and Neville a few steps behind them, and Ginny further back with her arms crossed looking at Harry with the expression she'd had since October, the one that was part admiration and part finally and part a very specific Ginny Weasley assessment of a situation that she was going to contribute to whether anyone had asked her or not. Breakfast? Ron said. Yes, Harry said. They walked toward the Great Hall together. The five of them, through the morning light and the castle's ordinary sounds, past the moving portraits and the enchanted windows and the suits of armor that occasionally shifted when they thought no one was watching. The mother box hummed quietly in Harry's inside pocket, a low, warm note, a sound like a door that had been open for a long time finally closing in the right direction. He thought about Darkseid. He would come. The gray eyes and the immovable purpose and the anti-life equation sealed now in the deepest part of Harry and waiting, patient as the cliff magic, for the moment when the last confrontation came. He thought about Voldemort, somewhere across England, recalibrating, rethinking, perhaps for the first time in decades genuinely uncertain. That was its own kind of progress. He thought about Becca, who was somewhere in the castle finding the particular corner she preferred, alone in the way that ancient beings were sometimes alone, not lonely, just accustomed to their own company in the way that centuries produced, and who had come to this planet expecting to retrieve a relic and had found instead something she'd apparently been quietly waiting to find without admitting it even to herself. He thought about his mother, standing in Godric's Hollow, touching something she had no name for and using it in the most human possible way. The Great Hall opened in front of them, full of light and noise and the collective warmth of a building full of people who were alive and here and choosing to be, and Harry walked into it. Somebody called his name from the Gryffindor table. He couldn't tell who, the voice lost in the general noise, and then several people were calling it. And then the hall was doing what the hall sometimes did when something had happened that everyone knew about but nobody had all the details of, and the attention in the room swung toward him like a compass finding north. He sat down at the Gryffindor table, put a piece of toast on his plate, poured himself tea. Ron dropped beside him and stole half his toast immediately, which was so fundamentally normal that Harry felt something in his chest unknot. Hermione sat across from him and opened her notebook to a new page. "We need to start planning the Horcrux search," she said. "I've made some preliminary lists based on the historical material in the restricted section, cross-referenced with your accounts of Voldemort's known movements." "After breakfast," Harry said. She looked at him. He looked back. "After breakfast," she agreed and put the notebook away and reached for the toast. At the end of the table, 2 seats down, a first-year who had been at Hogwarts for 6 weeks and was still in the process of learning what was usual here stared at Harry Potter with wide eyes and whispered to the person next to her, "Is he always like this?" The second first-year who had been at Hogwarts for 6 weeks and 3 days and therefore felt qualified to answer said, "Yeah, but I heard last year he was different." The first-year looked at Harry, who was eating toast and arguing cheerfully with Ron about something, and the mother box was in his pocket and the source was under everything, and the morning light came through the enchanted ceiling and made the hall look like the inside of a place that was going to matter. "Different how?" she asked. The second first-year thought about it. "Smaller," they said. Outside the castle, the lock went still and silver in the morning, and the mountains beyond it were going green and gold with the first real light. And somewhere in the space between things, very far from everywhere, a man who had never been a man sat with his absolute patience and looked at information about a boy in Scotland who had closed a door that should not have been closable. Darkseid looked at the data for a very long time. Then he looked at the anti-life equation, the space where it had been. The frequency signature of what remained, altered, sealed, made private by a combination of forces that his most advanced engineering had not predicted and could not immediately replicate. He looked at it the way he looked at everything, without surprise, without anger, with the complete undecorated attention of a being for whom reality was a problem to be solved rather than a condition to be endured. The boy had sealed the equation inside himself, had gone to the source wall and locked the final component behind a door that was specifically and uniquely him. Darkseid sat with this fact. It was an obstacle. Obstacles were temporary. Everything was temporary given sufficient time, and he had more time than everything. But there was something else in the data, something he had not projected. Not the power. Power could be predicted, could be mapped and extrapolated and planned against. Something underneath the power. The specific quality of the source resonance in the boy, the signature of his connection to it. He had died and returned. He carried both sides of the threshold. He was a bridge, but there was something else. Something Steppenwolf had noted in his report, a phrase buried in the tactical assessment that Darkseid now read again, a soul that carries death and chooses life. Darkseid looked at those words for a very long time. Then he set the report down and looked at the space in front of him, at the shape of the next 1,000 years, at the long, patient geometry of his purpose. And he made a small adjustment to his timeline. Not retreat. Darkseid did not retreat, but he gave himself more time. Because the boy, the extraordinary boy in the Scottish castle with his singing box and his wizard's wand and his source-deep mother's love built into his bones, the boy was going to be more interesting than predicted. And Darkseid, who had seen everything twice, found that interesting was something he was willing to wait for.